Welcome to the Snoozy Scientist, a calm corner of the universe where curiosity and science drift together to ease you toward sleep. Tonight, we're stepping through time to an age when the heart of South America lay underwater for millions of years, long before the rainforest, long before even the mighty Amazon River. This land was something entirely different. A vast inland lake that spread across the northern reaches of the continent, its still surface broken only by the shadows of ancient giants gliding beneath. Today, that same basin covers 6.7 million square kilometers. It has become the largest rainforest on Earth, home to one in every 10 known species of life. The Amazon carries more water than the next seven largest rivers combined, a rolling pulse so vast its clouds can shape weather on the other side of the world. It produces a fifth of the planet's oxygen and holds a fifth of its flowing freshwater. It feels timeless, eternal, older than memory itself. And yet, geologically, the Amazon River is young, only about 11 million years old, a newcomer in deep time. Before the mighty river, this land was drowned beneath a colossal inland lake system that stretched from horizon to horizon. Beneath its forest's root lies the memory of ancient waters that came before, fossils of fish and freshwater dolphins, shells pressed into stone, and ancient mud that still holds the fingerprints of vanished tides. But how could the richest rainforest on Earth begin beneath a flood? Why did the lake disappear? What force drained a body of water large enough to drown continents, and could it ever happen again? Tonight, we'll drift back through time to an age before the rainforest, before the river, to witness the lake that became the Amazon and uncover how that forgotten world shaped everything that would follow. But before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what the time is there. I always like to imagine this quiet community scattered like starlight across the globe, sharing the same story beneath different skies. If you enjoy these gentle journeys into Earth's past, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. A warm thank you as well to those who are already subscribed. You help this quiet corner of science grow. Now take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders relax, and together let's step softly into the story of the ancient lake that became the Amazon. In the age before the mountains, South America was a continent still half asleep. The land spread wide and low, its skin a patchwork of green wetlands, shallow rivers, and long drifting plains. From horizon to horizon, the world was soft and open, a slow-moving canvas of mud and water beneath skies heavy with mist. The air was warm, and time itself seemed to move like the rivers that crossed the land, unhurried and full of patience. In the Oligocene and early Miocene, there were no towering peaks to divide the skies, no walls of stone to catch the clouds. The continent leaned gently westward, and its rivers, obedient to that ancient tilt, all found their way toward the Pacific. Water carved its slow silver paths down this wide tilted slope, carrying minerals, life, and the faint shimmer of sunlight across the plains. For millions of years, this balance held, quiet and unbroken. Yet deep beneath the calm surface of that world, the earth was not still. Far below, in the unseen heart of the planet, colossal plates of rock inched their way through darkness. The Nazca Plate, restless and steady, pressed eastward beneath the edge of South America. The land responded not with speed, but with endurance. Each year brought a rise so small no eye could see it, yet in the language of time, it was the beginning of a transformation that would reshape a continent. At first, the changes were invisible, hidden within the bones of the earth. Rivers began to twist slightly, their directions uncertain. Valleys deepened, the air thickened with new patterns of rainfall. The world was still quiet, but beneath that quiet, Pressure gathered. Then, over epochs, the ground began to lift. What had once been open plains rose, layer by layer, into long ridges that touched the clouds. The Andes were being born, not in a moment of chaos, but through the slow, deliberate work of time. Their rise was so gradual that no creature alive would have noticed. Yet every passing generation lived in a landscape slightly different from the one before. As the Andes grew, they cast new shadows over the land. Their slopes caught the moisture from the sea winds, wringing clouds into rain. Valleys filled with streams that never used to be there. The air grew cooler at the heights, and where once there had been endless marsh, patches of rocky ground began to break through. The continent was shifting its weight, leaning now toward the east. The rivers that had once run freely to the Pacific found their paths slowly closing. The western edge of the land was rising, sealing itself off from the ocean. Rivers turned uncertainly, their waters slowing, curling back, and pooling where the land no longer offered escape. What had been a world of flow became a world of hesitation. In the low center of the continent, water began to collect. It seeped into old valleys and shallow basins, gathering in the quiet spaces between young hills. Rain fell, and with nowhere left to go, it stayed. What began as small scattered wetlands grew into vast connected floodplains. Each new layer of silt softened the land further, until the heart of South America became a basin waiting to be filled. Vegetation thickened along the edges of these waters. Ancient trees rooted themselves in damp soil, and reeds spread like slow green fire. Life adapted easily, unaware that the earth beneath it was rehearsing for something larger. Turtles slid through brown shallows. Early fish hunted in silty channels. Insects filled the air with soft vibrations, their wings catching the sunlight that filtered through the haze. Far away, the mountains continued their silent labor. Each tremor, each slow upward shift of rock, added another curve to the horizon. The Andes were no longer distant ridges, they were becoming a continent's spine, dividing water, air, and fate itself. With the rising peaks came change in the wind. Moisture that once passed easily inland was trapped and turned into torrents of rain. The western rivers swelled, but had nowhere left to travel. The water pooled, joining the growing network of lakes and swamps spreading across the basin. A vast inland sea was taking shape, though no creature yet knew it. From above, had one been able to see it then, the land would have looked like a continent preparing for something immense. The western edge climbing higher, the eastern plains sinking lower, the rivers curling back upon themselves as if uncertain of the way forward. It was as if South America had drawn a long breath and held it, waiting for the first true flood to come. In time, this new geography would give birth to one of the most extraordinary transformations in Earth's history. But for now, the continent simply waited beneath heavy skies. The Andes continued to rise, unseen forces still pushing, pressing, and folding the crust of the earth. The rivers still wandered, trapped between mountains and plains. The balance that had endured for millions of years was ending. South America had begun to reshape itself, quietly and without witness. The land was no longer only a place where rivers ran, but a bowl deepening with every heartbeat of the earth. Nature was setting the stage for its own flood, preparing, in patient silence, to drown itself. The first signs of confusion began quietly, like hesitation in a rhythm that had always flowed. The rivers that once knew their paths began to wander. They curved and stalled, caught between rising land and deepening plains. Water that once hurried toward the sea found its way blocked, its purpose uncertain. With each season of rain, the lowlands filled a little more, and the familiar became strange. Where the Proto-Amazon once ran freely westward, it now began to spread out and slow, forming wide pools that shimmered beneath heavy skies. These were not lakes at first, only places where the land sagged gently under the weight of constant rain. But over time, the pooling waters grew broader, deeper, and more permanent. Valleys blurred into wetlands, and the old rivers merged into a single, restless body that no longer drained to any ocean. The earth was quiet then, but it was not still. The Andes, still climbing to the west, blocked the old escape routes and trapped the water in the heart of the continent. The rainfall had nowhere to go but inward, collecting like breath held too long. Each drop joined the others, filling basins that grew wider than the horizon. Slowly, South America began to flood itself. The surface of this new world was a shifting mosaic of water and land, a place that could not decide what it wanted to be. To the north, broad floodplains stretched like mirrors beneath the sun. To the south, dark swamps swallowed the trunks of trees. In the middle, long rivers curled into one another, losing their names as they merged. It was not one lake or river or delta, but all of them at once. Geologists, millions of years later, would call it the Pebas mega wetland system. It was part lake, part swamp, part inland sea, and it covered a space larger than imagination. From the foothills of the young Andes to the far lowlands where Brazil now lies, the Pebas system spread in silence, a body of water that breathed with the weather. Some years it would rise higher, swelling with rain until it drowned whole forests. In drier times, its edges would retreat, revealing islands of mud and half-drowned plains. Life here learned to move with the rhythm of a world that changed shape each season. The air above this drowned land was heavy and still. Mists hung over the water at dawn, glowing softly when the sun broke through. The smell of wet earth carried far across the surface, where reeds swayed in windless air. Fish rippled beneath the shallows, and slow-moving shadows glided through the deeper pools. In places, the water grew dark with depth, reflecting only the clouds that passed over it. It was a place of silence and abundance, a landscape made entirely of waiting. As centuries passed, the boundaries between water and land blurred completely. Trees grew roots into the shallows, creating tangles of life that filtered sunlight into green light below. Grasses and ferns colonized floating mats of vegetation. Sediment from the Andes began to drift eastward, settling on the bottom in soft layers. These grains of sand and silt would over time record the slow conversation between mountain and water, a dialogue written in mud. The Pebas world was unlike anything Earth had seen before. It was not just a floodplain, and not yet a river system. It was an entire continent learning to live underwater. Across this immense expanse, ancient life adapted to stillness. The waters were warm, filled with nutrients carried down from the rising mountains. Algae bloomed, insects danced on the surface. Small fish darted through submerged forests, where roots hung like curtains beneath the waterline. Every living thing adjusted to the new order. Amphibians spread far across the shallows, and turtles found endless space to swim. Crocodilian ancestors thrived, growing larger in a world that seemed built for their quiet patience. Air-breathing fish appeared, rising now and then to gulp from the heavy sky. It was a place of soft light, slow movements, and quiet survival. Above it all, the climate began to change. The vast spread of still water altered the air itself. Sunlight reflected from its wide surface, feeding clouds that gathered and broke in endless cycles. Rain fed the lake, and the lake fed the rain. Over time, the Pebas system began to shape weather patterns across half a continent. The land, the water, and the air had become one continuous engine of balance. To the west, the mountains continued to climb, their summits hidden in cloud. To the east, the land stretched wide and low, collecting every drop that fell. Between them lay a world of suspended motion, a living mirror that reflected the slow power of the planet's transformation. In this place, time moved differently. The rivers had not vanished, only forgotten their way. What had once been a network of direction had become an ocean of indecision. The earth, patient and immense, seemed content to rest in this moment between two worlds, before the river found its course again, and before the forest learned to rise from water. For now, the continent floated in its own reflection, its rivers lost but not gone, its future quietly forming beneath the surface. Across the heart of the continent, the still waters grew until they swallowed the horizon. What began as scattered wetlands had become something vast, a shimmering inland sea that reached farther than any river could dream to flow. From the air, had there been eyes to see it then, South America would have looked as if it had grown a second coastline deep within its body, a silver mirror stretching for 1,000 kilometers beneath the pale light of the Miocene sun. This was the Pebas System, a living ocean trapped inside the land. It spread over more than 1,000,000 square kilometers, a space larger than modern Egypt, and connected what we now call Peru, Brazil, Colombia, and Bolivia in a single slow heartbeat of water. Its edges were soft and wandering. Some places were open and bright, where sunlight danced on shallow waves. Others were shadowed by thick vegetation, where the boundary between forest and flood blurred into an emerald haze. From above, islands drifted like thought itself, patches of land that came and went with the rhythm of the rain. The surface of the Pebas world was not calm, but constantly changing. Rain fell endlessly from skies heavy with moisture, feeding rivers that spilled into the basin and carried stories from the mountains. The Andes to the west, still young and rising, sent streams of fresh water filled with minerals and life. But from the north, through low channels invisible to modern maps, the sea occasionally whispered back. There were moments when the Caribbean reached deep inland, its salt water pushing through ancient passages and into the heart of the Pebas Basin. When that happened, tides rolled over the inland plains, carrying marine creatures far from any true ocean. Fossilized mollusks and snails, their shells preserved in layers of soft sediment, would later tell this story. They hold traces of both freshwater and marine DNA, a quiet record of a world that could not decide what it was. For a time, this inner sea tasted of salt. Tiny crustaceans drifted through its channels. Rays and early dolphins glided beneath its surface, following invisible trails of current. But the balance never lasted long. As the mountains rose higher, rainfall grew heavier, and the flow of rivers strengthened. The salt began to fade. The sea diluted itself back into fresh water, only to be touched again by the ocean during the next geological breath. It was a world that lived between identities, never entirely sea nor lake, but both at once. A place where tides met rain, and where the line between the two blurred like watercolor. In some seasons, the Pebas would have felt like a shallow tropical sea, bright and open to the sun. In others, it became a freshwater world, darkened by silt and filled with the quiet shimmer of life adapted to constant change. Beneath its surface, the world was full of motion. Sediment carried by distant rivers sank slowly, forming thick beds of clay and sand. Layer by layer, these deposits built the foundation for what would one day become the Amazon basin. Each grain of mud held the story of a storm, a river, or a mountain's erosion. Over millions of years, the floor of the Pebas system became an archive, storing the memory of rain. Along the shallower edges, plants leaned out over the water, their roots spreading into the soft silt. Here, the air was warm and sweet with decay. Insects hovered over still pools. Frogs called in steady rhythm. Occasionally, a ripple would pass across the surface, the slow breath of a turtle surfacing, or the faint wake of something larger gliding beneath. It was a place both quiet and alive, a vast inland expanse that reflected the sky but held the world within it. When the Caribbean tides reached farthest inland, the Pebas may have stretched like an arm of the ocean, its surface gleaming under distant storms. When rainfall dominated, it became a web of freshwater lakes, its color shifting to deep brown and green. This pattern repeated endlessly over millennia: expansion, retreat, salt, and fresh. The basin breathed like a living thing, its cycles as regular as a heartbeat in the slow rhythm of geologic time. Each pulse of change reshaped the creatures that lived within it. Marine species that wandered too far inland evolved into freshwater forms. Fish learned to tolerate both salt and rain. Entire lineages of animals adapted to the instability, thriving in a world where nothing stayed the same. This evolutionary dance, repeated generation after generation, would later leave its mark on the DNA of modern Amazonian life. The Pebas system was a paradox, both ocean and river, both sea and lake, both ancient and new. It was the middle chapter of a story written by water itself, where the continent's shape was still soft and uncertain. And though the world around it would one day dry and shift, this great inland sea had already begun to define the future. For a long time, the Pebas remained like this, a shimmering inland ocean resting in the heart of a continent, breathing with the sky. The land waited. The mountains continued their slow ascent to the west. The rivers still carried silt and memory eastward, and beneath the calm reflection of its waters, Earth was quietly preparing for the next turn in its long conversation with time. Beneath the soft surface of the Pebas world, life drifted in slow motion. The water was warm and full of nutrients, its color shifting from gold to green depending on the light. Sediment carried from the young Andes settled gently, feeding entire food chains that depended not on struggle, but on stillness. Here, survival did not mean constant motion or chase, it meant patience. In this inland sea, where rivers had lost their direction and tides came and went with uncertain rhythm, creatures grew large and unhurried. The calm favored size and endurance. Every breath, every movement seemed to echo the pace of the water itself. Along the shallow edges where sunlight reached the muddy bottom, plants grew in abundance. Mats of algae and aquatic grasses swayed in slow unison, releasing bubbles that shimmered to the surface. Tiny invertebrates grazed among the stems, and small fish darted through patches of shadow and light. They were early ancestors of the fish that still swim in the Amazon today, their bodies already learning to breathe air when the oxygen in the water grew thin. The air above the surface was heavy with humidity. Mists hung low, carrying the scent of life and decay. From beneath this haze, ripples spread outward, and something vast rose slowly from the depths. A dome-shaped shell, glistening like wet stone, broke the surface. This was Stupendimes, a turtle as long as a small car, with flippers that stirred the water like oars. Its eyes, calm and ancient, watched the drifting light before it sank again into silence. The Pez world was kind to such giants. The still waters supported their great weight, and the endless supply of soft plants and small fish fed them well. Stupendimes lived without rush, gliding between submerged forests and open shallows, a quiet traveler of an endless inland ocean. Not far away, a darker shape moved beneath the same waters. It was a predator, immense and silent, waiting in the shallows where the light began to fade. This was Purosaurus, a crocodilian longer than a bus and far heavier than any animal that shared its world. Its skin was ridged like ancient bark, and its jaws, lined with teeth thick as a person's wrist, could crush the shell of a giant turtle in a single bite. Yet even Purosaurus was shaped by the calm of Pebas. It did not chase its prey through currents. It waited, blending with the stillness, striking only when the surface rippled close enough to touch. The water around it was alive with smaller forms, early river dolphins, slender and pale, weaved through submerged forests where twisted roots formed mazes of shadow. They were creatures in transition, once belonging to the sea, now learning the rhythm of freshwater. Over time, their bodies would adapt to this new world, their eyes shrinking as the water grew darker, their sonar growing sharper in return. Among them glided stingrays, their wings undulating like silk. They had once followed the Caribbean tides inland, but now they lived entirely within freshwater, carrying in their bodies the memory of salt. They fed on crustaceans that burrowed into the soft mud, their movements slow and graceful, perfectly in tune with the stillness of the basin. Everywhere in the Pebas system, life learned to thrive in abundance rather than conflict. The lake was warm and rich, fed by minerals and endless sunlight. It was not a place of scarcity, but of generosity. Fish that breathed air emerged from these waters, evolving in pools that sometimes dried when the rains paused. Their ancestors would one day inherit the winding rivers of the Amazon, but here they began as creatures of adaptation, learning to live between two worlds. Beneath the murky surface, the world glowed with muted color. Schools of small fish flashed silver beneath floating leaves. Great catfish rested on the bottom, their whiskers tracing gentle arcs through the mud. Above them, snails crawled slowly across stems, leaving faint trails behind. The deeper one looked, the more the world seemed suspended in quiet balance. At times, sound carried strangely through the water. The call of a bird echoed from the distant edges of the lake, muffled and warped as it reached below. A shadow passed across the surface, perhaps a turtle surfacing for air, or the wide jaw of Purosaurus breaking the reflection of the sky. Then silence returned, the kind of silence that hums softly, filled not with emptiness but with life unseen. The Pebas system was a cradle of giants, but also of beginnings. Here evolution moved gently, guided not by violence, but by the rhythm of water and the patience of time. In this vast inland sea, life did not compete to survive. It adapted to stay in harmony with the slow pulse of the basin. Every creature, from the smallest snail to the largest predator, carried a piece of this ancient calm within it. The stillness of Pebas shaped them, taught them endurance, and left its mark in their bones. Long after the waters would drain and forests would rise in their place, that memory would linger in the turtles that basked on riverbanks, in the dolphins that swam through brown water, in the stingrays that still glide beneath the Amazon's light. For now, though, the world was at peace. The Pebas Sea stretched wide and quiet, its surface broken only by the slow breath of creatures who had mastered the art of living without hurry. At the far edges of the Pebas world, where the great inland waters met the slow rise of land, the line between earth and lake began to dissolve. It was neither solid ground nor open water, but something in between, a living border that shifted with every rainfall and season. The air there was thick and warm, filled with the scent of wet soil and leaves that never fully dried. Here, roots and water shared the same breath. Trees leaned outward from the shore, their trunks half submerged, their roots spreading into the shallows like searching fingers. They anchored themselves in the soft mud, forming tangled forests that could sway gently when the wind passed across the surface. The light that filtered through their branches was soft and broken, casting shifting patterns onto the rippling water below. These were the ancestors of the Amazon's modern flood forests, pioneers of a world that learned to live in water. Their leaves glistened with humidity, their roots carried oxygen through hollow channels, and their bark grew thick to resist constant immersion. Around their bases, the water was never still for long. Small waves rolled in from distant winds, brushing against roots and sending circles of light across the shallows. In these flooded forests, life moved differently. Frogs clung to floating leaves, their calls echoing through the thick air. Lizards skittered across the water's surface, their feet tapping quick ripples before vanishing among reeds. Young turtles rested on half-sunken branches, their shells gleaming under the pale sun. Each creature seemed perfectly shaped for this in-between world, where every surface was both land and water, and every breath came with the scent of both mud and bloom. The vegetation here was extraordinary. Some trees grew roots that branched above the water, arching outward like bridges before curving back down into the flooded soil. Others sent roots directly downward, forming curtains that trailed into the depths. Algae clung to these roots in green layers, and fish wove through them like threads in a tapestry. When the water rose, the trees seemed to grow taller, and when it fell, their trunks dried and cracked, leaving marks that recorded the rhythm of the ancient floods. The shallows beneath were alive with light and sound. Insects hummed in dense clouds, feeding on the constant bloom of life. Their reflections flickered across the surface like tiny sparks, vanishing whenever a ripple passed. Beneath the roots, schools of fish glided in slow, winding patterns, sheltering in the soft shade. Many of them could breathe air for short moments, rising quietly to the surface to sip the sky before sinking back into the cool dark. This borderland was not a place of balance, but of transformation. It was where the solid world learned to yield, and the liquid world learned to give. Amphibians found endless refuge here. Their eggs, once vulnerable on land, could float safely among the grasses and reptiles laid. Their young in hidden corners where light filtered through the water in green rays. Even the smallest crustaceans and snails adapted to live between tides that never truly reached the ocean. When storms came, the forests flooded entirely. The sky darkened, the rain thickened, and the water rose so high that even the tallest trunks seemed to vanish beneath the surface. Yet life did not vanish with them. Fish swam through the branches as if moving through another world. Birds perched on floating logs, their feathers damp and heavy. And when the rain ended and the lake began to recede again, everything emerged as if reborn, glistening, clean, and alive. Everywhere, signs of adaptation grew. The plants that thrived here had leaves designed to shed water quickly, veins that carried air to roots trapped below. The creatures that moved through the flooded forest grew eyes suited for both air and light, refracted through the water. Even the soil changed. Layers of fallen leaves and decaying. Roots built rich sediments, dark and full of nutrients, setting the foundation for the fertile lands that would one day feed the rainforest above. It was a strange paradox, this world of abundance born from drowning. Life did not retreat from the flood, it embraced it. Trees grew stronger where others might have rotted. Animals learned to move through the dual worlds of air and water. The Pebas System had become a cradle of transformation, a living experiment in survival and patience. In the quiet after a storm, the flooded forests shimmered like mirrors. The air was still, except for the sound of dripping leaves. Somewhere, a distant splash marked the movement of a creature unseen. Sunlight returned, bending through the mist, touching both the water and the roots below. The land seemed to breathe with the lake, inhaling the flood, exhaling the light. And in that rhythm, Earth found a new kind of balance, a place where land did not end where water began, but where both existed, together, shaping one another in slow, eternal exchange. The ancient Pebas Basin, vast and quiet, had grown its first forests. They were not forests of dry ground and wind, but of water and reflection, the first true whispers of the world that would someday become the Amazon. Beneath the deep green carpet of the modern Amazon lies a world that has not seen sunlight for millions of years. It rests in silence, hidden under layers of roots and soil, beneath rivers that never sleep and forests that never stop breathing. The people who walk there today see only the surface, a living web of plants and creatures, but under their feet, the earth remembers something different. It remembers water. It remembers the age when this forest was still a lake. When scientists began to study the hidden layers below the Amazon basin, they were not expecting the ocean to answer back. At first, they drilled into the ground to learn about soil, to study the history of rainfall and climate. But what they pulled up were not traces of forest or river. They found seashells, tiny corals, the remains of marine plankton, called diatoms, preserved like glass dust in ancient mud, fossils of animals that could only have lived in deep, calm water. These discoveries came from places hundreds of kilometers away from any modern coast. That distance alone carried a quiet astonishment. How could creatures that once drifted in salt water now rest beneath the roots of tropical trees? The answer was buried not just in the fossils themselves, but in the sequence of layers that surrounded them, thin sheets of silt and clay laid down one upon another through countless years of rising and falling water. To uncover the truth, scientists turned to the slow science of sediment cores. Each core was like a vertical timeline, a narrow cylinder of compacted history stretching millions of years deep. The upper layers were filled with traces of modern life. Plant pollen, charcoal from ancient fires, the signature of rainforest soil. Below that came the older sediments, denser, darker, and full of things that no longer belonged to the land. Within them were the remains of freshwater mollusks mixed with species from the sea, all pressed together in fine mud that once lay beneath Pebas waters. When dated carefully using isotopes and microfossil analysis, these layers told a story that stretched far beyond the age of the Amazon River. They spoke of a time when South America's interior was not green but blue, when waves rippled where now the canopy sways. Each fossil was a fragment of that lost world, proof that long before the forest took root, the Pebas Inland Sea had ruled this land. Some fossils came from Peru, others from Brazil and Colombia. Each one matched perfectly with the pattern of the Pebas System, that vast, shifting lake that had once covered over 1 million square kilometers of the continent. The shells of snails and clams showed delicate ridges shaped by still water. Corals revealed brief periods when salt water reached deep inland, their presence marking moments when the Caribbean tides had pressed through narrow channels to meet the basin. Between these marine intrusions lay layers rich with freshwater life, showing that the ancient lake had changed its nature again and again, breathing between ocean and rain. In laboratories, microscopes revealed details that time had hidden. The shells of tiny diatoms, smaller than grains of sand, glimmered under the light. Each shape was different, some built for salt water, some for fresh. Their alternating presence in the same layers proved what geologists had long suspected but never seen so clearly, that the Pebas world had been both sea and lake, shifting with the heartbeat of the earth itself. When the first full picture emerged, it changed how scientists saw the entire history of the Amazon. The river, once thought to be ancient beyond measure, was suddenly revealed as young compared to the lake that came before it. Beneath the forest, beneath the rivers that now flow east toward the Atlantic, lay the ghost of a sea that had once drained west, then nowhere at all. Excavations continued across the basin. Every dig, every core sample, revealed the same quiet pattern, a transition from water to land, from sediment to soil, from waves to trees. In some places, fossilized turtle shells rested beside fragments of fish bones. In others, the imprints of plants long extinct pressed into rock like delicate signatures. The deeper they dug, the more complete the story became. What astonished geologists most was how preserved it all was. The Pebas mud, buried beneath the rainforest's weight, had hardened into rock, but still held the fine details of ripples, shells, and even raindrop impressions. The basin was not just a graveyard of bones, but a memory made solid, a perfect fossil of an entire world. Standing within the rainforest today, surrounded by sound and color, it is almost impossible to imagine that every tree, every root, and every flowing stream rests upon the bones of an ancient sea. The soil that feeds the forest was once the floor of that inland ocean, and the minerals that nourish its plants were carried there by long vanished rivers. In the quiet layers below, the past remains untouched. Each fossil, each grain of sediment, whispers the same truth. The Amazon once held waves instead of trees, sunlight on water instead of leaves, and a silence so deep that even the earth itself had to listen. The slow rise of the Andes continued, shaping the horizon with quiet persistence. Over millions of years, the mountains climbed higher, grain by grain, fold by fold, until they became a spine of stone stretching along the continent's western edge. What had begun as a series of low ridges now towered above the clouds, their peaks capped with snow even in the warmth of the Miocene world. The earth moved with infinite patience, and though no creature alive then could sense it, this uplift was changing everything. The Pebas waters, once free to spill toward the Pacific, found their way blocked forever. The western outlet closed, sealed by the steady heaving of rock and the relentless rise of mountains. The ancient lake, once connected to distant seas, became trapped within the heart of South America. There was no longer a path for its vast waters to escape. Every raindrop that fell, every river that flowed inward, stayed. The basin had become a bowl with no edge, filling a little more. Each season, each century, each age. As the Andes rose, the air around them thickened with moisture. Warm winds swept from the ocean and met the growing wall of peaks, spilling rain across the eastern slopes. It fell in endless curtains, nourishing the valleys below and feeding the great basin that waited beyond. Storm after storm gathered over the range, drawn by the new heights, their clouds caught and wrung dry by the jagged mountainsides. The Pebas waters swelled with every passing millennium, their surface creeping higher into the surrounding plains. The world that emerged was one of stillness and reflection. The inland lake had expanded until it covered more than 1 million square kilometers, spreading across what would one day become Peru, Colombia, Brazil, and Bolivia. Its colors shifted with the light, pale green in the morning, deep brown after the rains, silver at dusk when the sky leaned close. The edges of the basin softened as forests gave way to floodplains and floodplains melted into open water. The land no longer had borders, only gradients of depth. Beneath this growing sea, the sediments of time thickened. Silt from the Andes drifted into the basin, carried by rivers that now ended not in the ocean but in silence. Each layer settled gently upon the last, building a record that would one day become stone. These layers, unseen and undisturbed, would hold the memory of this golden age of Pebas long after the water vanished. In this expanded world, life flourished. The warmth of the Miocene sun and the constant supply of fresh minerals from the mountains made the Pebas Lake one of the most productive ecosystems Earth had ever seen. Algae bloomed in the shallows, turning the water rich with color and life. Shoals of fish moved like clouds beneath the surface. Turtles the size of cars drifted between the submerged forests, and great crocodilians patrolled the still waters, their eyes breaking the surface like polished stones. Along the edges, the forests learned to adapt again. Trees grew taller, their roots anchoring deep in wet soil that was never truly dry. The air was heavy with the smell of decay and growth intertwined. Birds called from the canopy, their reflections trembling in the flooded world below. Insects filled the dusk with sound, weaving invisible patterns through the humid air. Everything lived as part of a slow, rhythmic pulse, the breathing of the lake and the rain that fed it. Yet the balance that held this world together was delicate. The same forces that fed the Pebas system also continued to shape its limits. The Andes did not stop rising. Each new tremor, each silent shift beneath the crust, lifted the mountains a little higher and tilted the land below a little more. The rain kept falling, feeding rivers that had no outlet, and the basin deepened further. What had begun as a wetland had now become a true inland sea, deep enough in places to drown the tallest trees, vast enough to hold its own horizon. The climate across the region grew more humid as the Great Lake expanded. The vast sheet of water reflected sunlight back into the sky, fueling more clouds, more rain, more flooding. The air shimmered with moisture, thick and heavy even at dawn. The world seemed caught in a loop of abundance, feeding itself endlessly. Every rise of the mountains sent new sediments eastward, and every flood spread those minerals across the lake, fertilizing it anew. From the perspective of time, this was the golden age of Pebas, the moment when water ruled the heart of South America. The lake stretched farther and deeper than ever before, linking distant lands under a single shimmering surface. The rivers no longer flowed outward. The mountains no longer shared their rain with the sea. Everything turned inward, drawn to the quiet center of the continent where water collected and waited. There, beneath the slow-moving clouds, the Amazon basin as we know it did not yet exist. The land was buried beneath an ocean of its own making, a living mirror that reflected both the sky and the patient rise of the mountains that trapped it. The Andes stood silent at the western rim, guardians of a lake that had no voice, their peaks gleaming with snow while the lowlands below drowned in sunlight. For a long time, the world remained that way, a vast, tranquil sea held in the palm of a continent, its surface glimmering softly beneath the endless Miocene sky. Beneath the warm surface of the Pebas Lake, where sunlight dissolved into shifting greens and golds, giants moved with quiet grace. The water was calm, heavy with life, and the air above it shimmered with the heat of endless rain. It was a world vast enough to cradle creatures that seemed to belong to dreams, slow, immense, and perfectly shaped for a life without haste. Among them ruled a hunter so large that even its shadow could stir silence. Purosaurus brasiliensis, the great crocodilian of the Miocene, lay half submerged along the muddy banks, its ridged back barely breaking the surface. Its jaws were longer than a grown man, and its skull alone weighed more than a full-grown lion. Its body stretched nearly 12 meters, making it longer than a bus and heavier than any land predator of its time. When it moved, it did so softly. Only the smallest ripples betrayed its presence. Its eyes, half above water, watched everything: the soft drift of turtles, the shimmer of fish, the back time, small stirrings of mammals that ventured too close to drink. For most of the day, it waited, patient and still, part of the water itself. But when it struck, it did so with a force that seemed to belong to another world. The power of its bite has been measured by those who studied its fossilized skull as greater than that of the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex. Its jaws could crush bone and shell with ease, snapping through the armor of ancient turtles like twigs. Yet it was not a mindless killer. In the Pebas Lake, where food was abundant and movement was slow, Purosaurus hunted rarely. A single kill could feed it for weeks. Most of the time, it was a creature of patience, blending into the stillness, waiting for the perfect moment when the surface trembled just enough to betray life. Not far from where Purosaurus rested, another giant drifted through the warm shallows. Stupendimes, the car-sized turtle of the Pebas waters, glided with the unhurried rhythm of the lake itself. Its shell, broad and smooth, caught the glimmer of the sun where it broke through the canopy above. With flippers that moved like slow wings, it drifted through channels lined with reeds, browsing on aquatic plants and soft vegetation that floated at the surface. Fossils of stupendomies found millions of years later would show scars and gouges across their shells, reminders of the battles that had played out in this drowned world. Some wounds healed, others did not. These marks told quiet stories of survival and struggle, of ancient duels between giants in the still water. Sometimes it was Purosaurus that left the mark. Other times it was another Stupendomes, rival turtles colliding in territorial displays that echoed through the water like muted thunder. The Pebas Lake was full of such encounters, though they unfolded in the slow rhythm of an ecosystem built on calm abundance. Titan fish, ancestors of modern Arapaima and Fractocephalus, swam through the deeper channels. They were immense, armored with scales that caught the light like hammered bronze. Their movements stirred the sediment below, clouding the water in gentle spirals. When they rose to the surface to breathe, their scales glistened with moisture, and their slow exhalations rippled across the mirrored expanse. These giant fish fed on smaller creatures, crustaceans, amphibians, and unlucky fish drawn too close to their massive jaws, yet even they had predators. Purosaurus sometimes hunted them, ambushing from below with an upward surge so powerful that it could lift an entire wave. The strike would come and go in an instant, and then the lake would return to silence, save for a faint trail of bubbles rising to the surface. This was the rhythm of Pebas. Predators and prey moved through their shared world with patience, not panic. The balance of life did not depend on constant struggle, but on the steady exchange between stillness and movement. Even the fiercest hunters lived in long cycles of waiting, conserving energy in a world where time seemed endless. The soundscape of this ancient lake was unlike any found on Earth today. The air above the water hummed with insects, their wings creating a soft, unbroken tone. The splash of a surfacing turtle echoed faintly in the distance. Occasionally, the deep, resonant bellow of a Purosaurus rolled across the basin, its call carrying through miles of open water and dense vegetation. Beneath it all, the water whispered against the shore, reshaping the land grain by grain. Every creature in the Pebas world seemed shaped by the same rule: grow large, move slowly, and endure. The still waters of the basin favored those who conserved rather than fought. In this calm, warm environment, giants thrived, not through aggression, but through adaptation to abundance. For countless generations, these beings lived and died in the slow cycles of the lake. Their bones settled gently into the mud, layer upon layer, becoming part of the sediment that would one day tell their story. What remains now are fragments: a jaw here, a shell there, the outline of scales pressed into stone. Yet together, they form a portrait of a world that moved at the pace of water, a kingdom of giants gliding through sunlight and shadow beneath the quiet surface of a continent still becoming itself. In that time, the Amazon was not yet a river, but a sea of calm and reflection, and within it, life had reached its grandest scale, thriving not in conflict, but in the deep and endless stillness of the Pebas age. If you could stand beside the Pebas Lake during its greatest age, before the world had yet turned toward the familiar, the first thing you might notice would not be its size, but its silence. It was a wide, living hush stretched across the continent. The air hung heavy with warmth, carrying only the softest sounds: the faint ripple of water brushing reeds, the distant cry of an unseen bird, the gentle hiss of rain on the surface of a world made entirely of reflection. The light moved slowly through the mist, gilding the ripples, catching on floating leaves. Raindrops fell by the thousands, each striking the water with a tiny note, together forming a rhythm that never stopped. Every drop that landed joined the same ancient beat, the pulse of the Pebas world, the sound of the continent breathing through water. The lake's voice was never loud. It did not roar like an ocean, nor rush like a river. It murmured endlessly and softly through its endless shallows. Waves slid against the process, trunks of half-drowned trees, whispering against the roots of ancient plants that grew in the in-between places where soil and lake traded places with the seasons. The reeds swayed in slow, liquid gestures, brushing against one another in a sound like quiet applause. In the distance, the heavy wings of Miocene birds stirred the humid air. Some were small and quick, darting through the canopy, chasing insects that hovered above the water. Others were larger, their calls echoing far across the basin, carrying over the stillness. Their songs mixed with the croaks of amphibians hidden beneath leaves and the slow splash of a turtle surfacing for air. Together, they created a kind of music, made not of melody but of pattern, the subtle sounds of a world at peace with itself. When the storms came, they did not break this silence. They became part of it. Rain would sweep across the basin, turning the sky to gray and the water to glass. Sheets of droplets blurred the horizon until lake and air became one. Lightning flashed behind the far ridges of the young Andes, and thunder rolled like distant drums. Even then, there was a gentleness to it all, as though the earth itself were breathing in time with the rain. Every creature added its note. The heavy tail of a crocodilian slapped the surface with a hollow thud. The slow rise of a turtle's shell made ripples that widened and vanished. Giant fish turned beneath the water, their bodies shifting the current with movements so smooth they barely disturbed the silt below. Each sound dissolved quickly, swallowed by the enormity of the lake's calm. In this drowned world, even silence had depth. It pressed against the skin, a quiet so complete that it seemed to come from the planet itself. The hum of life existed everywhere, too low for ears to hear, carried through water, through roots, through the dense, oxygen-rich air. It was the heartbeat of a continent, though a drowned one, pulsing beneath waves instead of soil, long after. The Pebas System vanished. Its voice did not entirely fade. Deep beneath the modern Amazon basin, scientists now lower thin metal tubes into the earth, pulling up columns of layered mud that tell the story of this vanished age. Within those layers lie traces of its rhythm, thin bands of darker clay marking times of heavy rainfall, pale layers recording seasons of dryness. Even chemical residues echo the pulse of the ancient lake, patterns repeating like fossilized weather. To the instruments of modern geology, these sediments still hum with faint signals. They reveal centuries of flood and drought, captured in alternating textures. They hold fragments of ancient algae, minerals carried from distant mountains, and the quiet chemical fingerprints of vanished life. Each layer is like a whisper from the past, a reminder that the sound of the Pebas world never truly stopped. It only sank deeper into time instead of air. When scientists study these cores, they listen not with ears but with instruments, tracing the slow music of climate written in mud. The data form a rhythm that stretches across millions of years, showing how the basin filled and emptied, how rain came and went in long, patient cycles. In this way, the drowned heartbeat of the continent still resonates, not in sound but in pattern. If you could place your hand upon the ground of the modern Amazon and feel far enough beneath the roots, perhaps you would sense it too, that buried rhythm, the faint echo of waves that once covered everything. The forest above hums with its own life now, a new generation of sound rising from the old. The rustle of leaves, the rush of rivers, the cries of modern birds, all of them shaped by what came before, by the long memory of water. The Pebas Lake is gone, its surface long turned to soil and forest, yet its sound endures in quiet ways. It lingers in the chemistry of the land, in the soft curve of the riverbanks, in the gentle rains that still fall each afternoon. The the world has changed, but the earth remembers its own music. Deep within its layers, the drowned heart of a continent still beats, slow and steady, beneath the roots of the living Amazon. The slow calm of the Pebas Lake could not last forever. Deep beneath the surface of the continent, Earth was still moving, its ancient machinery quietly at work. The same tectonic forces that had lifted the Andes from the seafloor continued to push upward, folding and crushing the crust of South America with unrelenting patience. What had once been a soft horizon began to harden into peaks. The mountains climbed higher into the sky, and with their rise, the balance of the world began to shift. As the Andes reached new heights, they began to reshape the very air around them. Winds that once swept freely from the Pacific now collided with the wall of stone and were forced upward. The warm air cooled, releasing its moisture in torrents of rain that poured down the eastern slopes. Day after day, storm after storm, the mountains fed the basin below. The rainfall, trapped by the sheer height of the range, became a constant presence, drumming softly against the surface of the Pebas Lake. But the rain did more than feed the water. Each drop that struck the mountains carried away a grain of rock, tiny fragments, worn loose by the endless rhythm of weather, gathered into streams. Those streams deepened into rivers, and those rivers began to cut canyons through the rising Andes. With every storm, the young mountains gave a little more of themselves to the basin below, their erosion the quiet handwriting of time across the land. Down in the lowlands, the effects were subtle at first. The water of the Pebas Lake grew heavier with sediment, clouded with fine dust from the mountains. The color shifted from green to a deep, earthy brown. As centuries passed, layers of silt began to settle on the lake's floor, building slowly upon the old deposits of earlier ages. The once clear water thickened with life and minerals, feeding new blooms of algae that painted the surface in shades of gold and emerald. The great inland sea was beginning to fill from below. At the same time, something else was stirring. The very rivers that once lost themselves in the vastness of Pebas began to change their nature. They grew stronger, fed by the relentless rainfall and the steep new slopes that gravity had carved along the edges of the Andes. Where once they had meandered lazily into the still basin, they now began to move with purpose, carving channels through the sediment that had long been their home. The sound of the land began to change too. The quiet whispers of the lake were joined by the growing voice of moving water. You could hear it in the canyons, in the rushing of rivers as they carried mountain dust and ancient minerals eastward. The stillness that had once defined Pebas gave way to motion, a new rhythm rising out of the old. The erosion of the Andes worked like a slow tide turned upside down. Instead of water cutting down through stone, it was stone flowing down into water. The mountains fed the basin with their own body, grain by grain, building up deltas and floodplains that extended farther with each generation. Over time, these deposits began to raise the floor of the Great Lake, changing its depth, its current, and its shape. What had once been a stable inland sea became a living, shifting landscape, a place of channels, islands, and shallow lagoons that changed with every season. The transformation was not violent but steady, like the deep breathing of the planet itself. The weight of sediment pressed downward, and in response, the crust below the basin began to flex. The water that had once spread endlessly across the land now found itself confined by its own weight. The lake's borders retreated slightly each century, replaced by new plains born from the mountain's dust. This was a turning point, though no creature alive could have known it. The Pebas System, once defined by stillness, was beginning to move. Rivers that had wandered without purpose were now carving their first true paths. Streams braided across the basin, connecting and separating in an endless dance. Channels deepened, flowing faster, cutting through the layers of silt like knives through soft clay. For the first time in millions of years, the waters of the continent began to search for a way out. From above, had one been able to see it, the transformation would have looked almost imperceptible, a subtle rearranging of light and shadow across the land. But beneath that calm surface, the earth was already rewriting its design. The Pebas Lake, once so vast and serene, was beginning to fragment under the quiet weight of time. The rains did not stop. The mountains did not rest. Every year, the Andes lifted themselves a little higher, and every year, more sediment flowed down their slopes, filling the basin a little more. The still waters of Pebas, once the mirror of a continent, were turning into rivers once again, not yet the Amazon, but something close. And so, in the patient language of geology, motion replaced stillness. The continent, that had once drowned itself in calm, began to stir. Water met mountain, and together they began to carve a new world, one shaped not by reflection, but by flow. The fall of the Pebas Lake did not begin with a storm or a rupture. It began in silence. The change came so slowly that even time itself seemed unsure of when it started. For ages, the great inland sea had ruled the heart of South America, wide and deep, its waters unbroken from horizon to horizon. But deep beneath the calm surface, the land was shifting again. The Andes, still climbing, had begun to tilt the continent ever so slightly, just enough for gravity to find a new path. In the west, where the mountains met the basin, small streams began to form, carrying thin ribbons of water away from the lake. They were not true rivers yet, only narrow escapes through cracks in the rising land. To the creatures that lived in Pebas, nothing seemed to change. The giant turtles still glided through the shallows. Crocodilians still floated half submerged, waiting for motion. Fish still rose to the surface in the heavy heat of the afternoon. But below them, the water was moving, not in the fallend, swirling way of storms, but in a long, patient pull that none could see. Each century, the water level dropped by only a few centimeters. The change was invisible to the living. Shorelines shifted just enough to expose a little more mud. Plants reached farther down to find the receding edge. What had once been a permanent floodplain slowly began to dry in places. Still, for countless generations of life, Pebas seemed eternal. Over thousands of years, the western edge of the lake grew shallower. The streams that carried its water toward the rising Andes deepened with each season's rain, carving narrow paths into the rock. Each new flood widened the channels, carrying fine sediment and the faint memory of the inland sea eastward. The great basin, that had once been a mirror to the sky, began to break apart, though no map existed to record its slow undoing. The transformation unfolded so gradually that it never felt like loss. Where water retreated, new worlds appeared. Wetlands spread across the low plains, glowing with the reflection of young sunlight. Marsh grasses and reeds filled the empty shallows, swaying in rhythm with a breeze that no longer skimmed across open water. Forests crept forward inch by inch, their roots testing the soft ground left behind by the shrinking lake. In places, channels of deeper water joined together, forming the first outlines of what would one day become rivers. The Pebas System was dissolving into 1,000 fragments of itself, lakes within lakes, rivers within rivers, each one finding its own course through the changing land. From above, had one been able to see through the haze of ancient air, the transformation would have looked like a slow unraveling. The vast blue plain that had once covered the heart of a continent was giving way to a mosaic of green and brown, wet and dry, open and forested. The creatures that lived within Pebas adapted as they always had. The turtles followed the shrinking water lines, grazing in the past, shallows where vegetation grew thickest. The great crocodilians hunted along new channels, their movements guided by sound and scent through the narrowing wetlands. Fish evolved to survive in less oxygen, some learning to breathe air for short moments, others finding refuge in the deeper remnants of the lake. Life moved in rhythm with the retreating water, unaware that an age was ending. As the western escape routes deepened, more water drained away each year. Rivers, once blocked by the Andes, now found subtle corridors through valleys carved by erosion. Each drop of rain that fell upon the mountains eventually found its way eastward, drawing the basin's lifeblood toward a distant destiny. The process was so slow it could only be measured in the language of geology. By the time the Pebas system had lost even a fraction of its volume, entire species had evolved, flourished, and disappeared. The sediment carried from the mountains continued to build up within the basin, raising its the once deep heart of Pebas became shallower, spreading wide instead of high. The inland sea became a vast, patchwork wetland, a kingdom of swamps and floodplains, stretching farther than any creature could travel. Each flood rearranged its boundaries, and each drought revealed new land. The Great Lake, that had once been the mirror of South America, was now a collection of mirrors, scattered and incomplete, reflecting a sky that had changed as slowly as the water itself. Eventually, the balance tipped for good. The eastern lands, now lower than the center of the continent, began to draw the water toward them. The rivers that had formed in the collapsing Pebas system gathered strength, carving their paths across the soft ground. They carried the legacy of the ancient lake, its minerals, its sediments, its fossils, across the growing plains. By the time the Pebas Lake was gone, no creature that had once swum in its depths would have recognized the land that replaced it, where the endless horizon of water had stretched. Forests had begun to take root. The air that once shimmered with mist now filled with the scent of soil and leaves. The sound of waves had faded, replaced by the trickling of rivers and the chorus of the first rainforests. No map ever recorded the existence of Pebas, and no memory remained of its stillness. Yet its story lingered in the ground beneath, written in layers of mud and shell, in the fossils of turtles and fish that once called it home. The great inland sea had not vanished in a single moment. It had simply exhaled, slowly, returning its water to the sky and its silence to the earth. The Pebas world was gone, but its breath remained, captured forever in the soil beneath the Amazon's roots. When the waters of the Pebas Lake finally began to retreat for good, it happened with a gentleness that only the earth could manage. There was no single moment of collapse, no boundary where lake ended and land began. Instead, the surface lowered in silence, each passing season leaving behind a little more earth and a little less reflection. The world that had once been oceanic began to reveal its skin, wide stretches of mud and sediment, shining beneath the sun like wet bronze. This exposed land was young and raw. The soil, heavy with the memory of the lake, carried nutrients from millions of years of life and decay. It was a mixture of fine sand, silt, and clay, washed down from the Andes and settled at the bottom of the Great Basin over ages of stillness. When the last of the water withdrew, it left behind a world rich enough to grow almost anything. The bones of the lake had become the foundation of a new continent of green. At first, it was a quiet rebirth. The land steamed under, the sun releasing the smell of minerals and damp earth. Pools of water remained scattered across the plain, glinting between ridges of drying mud. Insects were among the first to return, tracing delicate paths across the ground that had once been unreachable beneath the water. Their wings caught the light as they danced above puddles where fish still gasped, stranded in the remnants of the inland sea. Then, with the first rains, life began to creep in from the edges. Reeds and sedges took hold in the shallows, weaving mats of green across the wet plains. Grasses followed, thin at first, then thick and golden, bending in soft waves when the wind passed over. Their roots reached deep into the fertile soil, anchoring the fragile ground and drawing up the nutrients that had rested undisturbed for so long. These plants, humble and small, were the first to claim the land that had once belonged to water. In time, shrubs appeared among the grasses, followed by the first pioneer trees. They were hardy and adaptable, their seeds carried by wind or by birds that followed the retreating shoreline. Their roots dug through layers of old sediment, breaking apart compacted clay that had lain untouched for millions of years. Each tree brought shade. Each leaf that fell began the slow work of building new soil on top of the old. The forest that would one day cover the continent began here, in silence, rising from the bones of a vanished lake. The air grew heavier with moisture as the landscape transformed. Small rivers traced the old paths of the Pebas Lake, winding across the new plains like silver threads. During the rainy seasons, they spilled over their banks, spreading fresh layers of silt and ash. Each flood added new nutrients to the land, replenishing it again and again. It was a rhythm that would never end, water retreating, returning, retreating again, carving the pulse of what would become the Amazon basin. Over generations, the young forest thickened, vines coiled around tree trunks, linking the canopy to the ground in living bridges. Ferns spread across the damp earth, and orchids clung to bark, drinking the mist. The descendants of lake creatures now swam in narrow rivers and shallow swamps, adapting once more to the changing world. Air-breathing fish lingered in pools left behind by the floods. Freshwater dolphins and stingrays found new homes in the winding waterways that spread across the plains. Everywhere, life followed the pattern left by the lake. The lowland valleys that had once formed the basin's floor became natural floodplains, their soil darker and richer than anywhere else on Earth. Each time the rivers overflowed, they carried tiny pieces of the mountains and of the ancient lakebed, spreading them like dust across the land. The fertility of this soil would one day sustain not only forests but entire civilizations. Yet in this age, it was only beginning its slow, patient work of creation. The Pebas system was gone, but its legacy was alive in every root that took hold. Where water had once stilled, leaves now rustled. Where fish had drifted in silence, the air now carried the sound of insects, birds, and the sighing of the wind. The continent had changed its shape and its spirit. The vast stillness that had once defined it was replaced by a living rhythm, a balance of flood and forest, of soil and sky. The transformation was not just geological, but biological. Every new plant that grew added to the conversation between land and life. Grasses gave way to shrubs, shrubs to trees, and trees to entire ecosystems that would stretch unbroken from horizon to horizon. In a few million years, the descendants of these first pioneers would form the richest rainforest on Earth. But for now, this was the dawn of something simpler, quieter, and full of promise. As the sun set over the newly exposed plains, the land shimmered like gold. Pools of water reflected the sky, fading from blue to orange to silver as evening fell. The air cooled, and the scent of damp earth filled the wind. The lake was gone, but its spirit remained, woven into every grain of soil, every blade of grass, every root pushing gently downward. From its slow retreat, a new world had emerged, a land reborn from water, patient, fertile, and waiting for the forest to come. The last echoes of the Pebas Lake faded slowly into the soil. What had once been a vast mirror of sky and water was now a quilt of wetlands and forests, stitched together by ribbons of rain-fed streams. The land had become restless again, its silence giving way to a soft, constant murmur. Somewhere deep within the basin, the water was beginning to find direction. For millions of years, the Pebas system had gathered water from across a continent but had never released it. Now, as the Andes stood higher and the land continued to tilt eastward, gravity began to draw the basin's heart toward the open ocean. Small rivers that once ended in stillness started to link together, carving subtle paths through the thick sediments that had been laid down by the ancient lake. Each trickle cut a little deeper, joined by the next, until the surface of South America began to breathe with the sound of flowing water. It was not a sudden birth, but a long awakening. Over thousands of centuries, the scattered wetlands began to connect into a network of rivers, streams, and flooded forests that all leaned east. During the rainy seasons, the basin filled, and when the waters withdrew, they left behind new channels that deepened with every cycle. The old floor of the Pebas Lake, soft and rich with clay, gave way easily to the movement of water. Each meander and curve carved by these newborn rivers was guided by the faint memory of the lake's shape. The first true flow began quietly, somewhere near the foothills of the Andes. There, the rains were constant, falling in sheets that fed the land below. The rivers gathered strength as they ran eastward, merging with others that had once belonged to separate basins. They did not yet have a name, but together they were forming something new, a single, continuous current that stretched from the mountains to the distant Atlantic. As this new system expanded, it transformed everything in its path. The floodplains widened, lined with forests that thrived on the rich soils left behind by the receding lake. Reeds gave way to trees, and trees gave way to entire canopies that arched over the water. The rivers wound through them like veins of light, carrying with them the silt and minerals that would nourish one of the most fertile landscapes on Earth. The movement of water reshaped the land's rhythm. Where once the Pebas Lake had pulsed with the slow heartbeat of evaporation and rain, the new river system moved with steady grace, flowing day and night toward the ocean. The lowlands no longer held still water, but an endless migration of droplets, each one beginning as mist on the mountains, falling as rain into tributaries, and traveling hundreds of kilometers toward the sea. This slow connection of streams and floodplains marked the true birth of the Amazon River. It was a voice carved by time, one that began as a whisper beneath the weight of stone and ended as a roar across the plains. The continent, once a world of stillness, now spoke in the language of flow. The first life that followed the river came quietly too. Fish that had once swum in Pebas learned the patterns of the current, adapting to the new rhythm of freshwater that no longer stood still. Plants evolved to drop their seeds into the moving water, letting them drift to distant shores. Birds followed the winding courses, nesting in the forests that lined the banks. The Amazon, though young in geological time, became an engine of movement, a system that spread life instead of holding it. Far to the east, the new river found its final destination. It met the Atlantic with no fanfare, only the mingling of fresh water and salt, one world meeting another in silence. Over time, its mouth widened into a vast delta, carrying the sediments of the Andes into the ocean. The same minerals that had once fed the Pebas Lake now poured into the sea, clouding the water with the color of earth. Even from space, the river's plume could one day be seen, stretching far into the ocean, a fingerprint of brown and gold marking the place where the Amazon reached the world beyond the continent. Though the Pebas Lake had vanished, its influence lingered in every curve of the river's path. The sediments that once filled its basin now guided the flow, shaping the meanders and floodplains that define the modern Amazon. The vast wetlands that remained after its retreat became the lungs of the rainforest, breathing in rhythm with the rains. Every modern drop that travels through the Amazon's channels still traces the ghostly outline of that ancient lake. The river that emerged was not just a feature of geography, but the continuation of Earth's long memory. It carried within it the story of transformation, from stillness to motion, from depth to distance, from reflection to connection. In the slow turning of time, the continent had exchanged one kind of life for another. The Pebas Age ended quietly, absorbed into the soil and written into the soil, the stones beneath the jungle. But in its place, a new chapter began to flow, a river that would one day feed the largest rainforest on Earth, shape climates across the planet, and cradle more life than any other. The basin had found its voice at last. The water that had once waited in silence now spoke with endless movement. The age of the lake was over. The age of the river had begun. Even though the Pebas Lake had long disappeared beneath soil and forest, part of it never truly died. Its still waters had vanished, its horizon of reflection replaced by trees and rivers, yet life had found ways to carry the memory forward. In the quiet depths of the Amazon's modern waters, ancient lineages still move, unchanged in spirit, shaped by the world that came before. Every living thing that calls the Amazon home carries a story written in its blood. For some, that story reaches back to the Pebas Age, the age when South America's heart was a lake instead of a rainforest, when the world was not yet divided into land and river. Scientists have traced the lines between these two worlds, finding that several species alive today are more than just residents of the Amazon. They are its oldest ghosts, survivors of the inland sea that came before it. The Pink River dolphins, gentle and strange, are one of these living memories. They move through the flooded forests of the Amazon with the same slow grace their ancestors once used to navigate the shallow waters of Pebas. Their bodies are supple and soft, able to twist between tree trunks as easily as they once wove through submerged branches in the ancient lake. Their color, that faint blush of rose, comes from blood vessels that lie close to their skin, but it also seems to carry a trace of the warm, silted waters where their story began. Genetic studies reveal their connection clearly. Long ago, their ancestors were marine dolphins that entered the Pebas Lake through temporary channels from the Caribbean. When the lake turned fresh and isolated itself from the ocean, these dolphins stayed behind. Cut off from salt water, they adapted, little by little, to a new life inland. Their bodies changed, their dorsal fins shrank, their eyesight dimmed in the dark rivers, and their sense of sound grew sharper than ever. Over millions of years, they became something new, a lineage shaped not by tides, but by rain. The same is true for the Amazon's freshwater stingrays. Their ancestors once glided across the sandy floors of ancient seas, their flat bodies sculpted by saltwater currents. When the Pebas Lake formed, they followed the gentle pull inland, feeding in the brackish shallows where sea met fresh water. Fossils found deep beneath the rainforest show that these stingrays thrived there for ages, evolving alongside the shifting moods of the lake. When Pebas finally vanished, those that survived adapted to the new rivers and streams, becoming entirely freshwater creatures. Today, they are found nowhere else in the world, living reminders of a vanished ocean. And then there are the manatees. In the slow, winding tributaries of the Amazon, they drift through water thick with green light, grazing on floating plants. They are the quiet inheritors of an ancient lineage that once fed in the flooded meadows of Pebas. Their ancestors, too, were creatures of the sea that ventured inland during times when the Caribbean spilled into the basin. When the water changed and the salt disappeared, they remained, adjusting to the gentler rhythm of freshwater life. Their descendants still move with that same calm, their round forms gliding through silence as if carrying the weight of memory in every breath. These are not the only ones who remember. Genetic traces across countless other species tell the same story, a hidden inheritance passed down through the ages. Fish that breathe air, amphibians that thrive in waterlogged forests, turtles that can tolerate long floods, all owe something to the ancient conditions that Pebas once provided. The rise and fall of that inland sea wrote its patterns into the DNA of the living world, shaping not only who survived, but how they lived. In this way, evolution became a kind of echo. Each adaptation, each small change in a fin, a lung, or a sense was like a note held over time, resonating through generations. The extinction of the lake did not erase its influence. It simply rewrote the stage on which its actors performed. The basin that had once been still now flowed, but its inhabitants carried within them the memory of stillness. If you could listen closely enough, beyond the hum of insects and the whisper of modern rivers, you might hear those echoes still. The splash of a dolphin breaking the surface, the glide of a stingray across a sandy riverbed, the soft sigh of a manatee as it exhales beneath the trees. Each sound is a quiet reminder of that forgotten inland sea. To walk along the banks of the Amazon today is to walk above a palimpsest of time. Beneath the soil lie the fossils of Pebas, and within the living move its descendants. The past and present coexist, not in stone alone, but in the blood that flows through every creature here. The Pebas Lake may have vanished millions of years ago, but it left its mark in the code of life itself. Its extinction did not bring silence. It composed a new song, one that still plays in the new rivers, in the forests, and in the breath of the creatures that inherited its calm. In their movements, the ancient lake lives on, a memory turned into motion, forever flowing through the veins of the Amazon. There was a moment in Earth's deep history, quiet but extraordinary, when the rivers of an entire continent changed their minds. For millions of years, water had flowed westward across South America, draining toward the Pacific, following the old slope of the land that leaned gently in that direction. Every raindrop that fell on the plains and highlands made the same slow journey, west, always west, until it met the sea. But as the Andes rose and the continent bent beneath their growing weight, that ancient path began to fade. The world was being tilted, and time itself seemed to turn around. It began with the smallest of changes. The Andes, pushed upward by the slow pressure of tectonic plates, grew heavier with every passing millennium. Beneath them, the crust of the continent flexed and sagged, like the surface of a vast, living skin. What had once been a smooth slope toward the west began to bend downward in the east. At first, this tilt was barely perceptible, only a shift of a quadas, few centimeters over 1,000 years. But in deep time, even such delicate movements carry the force to remake entire worlds. The rain kept falling as it always had. The rivers kept flowing toward the Pacific. Yet beneath them, the continent's heart was changing shape. The valleys that carried those rivers began to fill with sediment washed down from the mountains. Each flood laid down new layers of silt and clay, raising the land and blocking old paths. Slowly, the western outlets that once guided water toward the sea became shallower, then vanished altogether. The trapped waters had no choice but to find another way. Over thousands of years, new channels began to carve their way across the land, turning eastward instead of west. The very same rivers that had once drained the Pebas Basin in the direction of the Pacific now began to wander toward the opposite horizon. The pull of gravity, responding to the continent's subtle change in angle, guided them toward the Atlantic, a destination they had never reached before. To imagine this reversal is to imagine time itself moving backward. The rivers that had once flowed into sunset began to flow into sunrise. The land that had been defined by its retreat from the mountains was now defined by its connection to the sea. Each curve and channel that the new rivers carved erased part of the old geography, reshaping South America's face with the patience of eternity. It was not a sudden or violent transformation. The process took millions of years, unfolding in a rhythm too slow for any creature to notice. Forests rose and fell along the shifting banks. Animals came and went, unaware that the direction of their world's heartbeat had changed. The rivers themselves carried the story in silence, rearranging sediment, sculpting new valleys, and leaving behind old beds that turned to stone. As the Amazon basin continued to sink under the weight of the Andes, the eastward pull grew stronger. Water began to gather in low plains that stretched toward the Atlantic, forming vast networks of wetlands and floodplains. Tributaries branched and merged, spreading like veins through the forest that was now taking hold of the land. What had once been isolated lakes and marshes became part of a single, flowing system, the young Amazon River. This reversal was more than a shift of direction. It was one of the most profound hydrological events in Earth's history. The continent itself had turned over, its internal balance rewritten by the slow machinery of tectonics. The Amazon, the largest river system the planet would ever know, was born from this act of geological inversion. Its flow became the voice of a continent learning a new way to breathe. Every drop of rain that falls in the Andes today carries the memory of that transformation. It begins its journey high in the mountains, where glaciers and clouds meet, and travels thousands of kilometers eastward across the basin, through forests that once lay beneath the Pebas Lake. When it reaches the Atlantic, it carries with it silt and minerals from the ancient rocks of the Andes, pieces of mountain dissolved into motion. In that way, the river continues to wear the past into the future, turning the memory of stone into the rhythm of water. The reversal of the Amazon's flow did more than create a new river. It rewrote the story of life across an entire continent. The fresh sediment carried from the Andes enriched the plains, feeding forests that grew deeper and denser with every passing millennium. The climate shifted, stabilizing under the influence of this vast new system of moisture and vegetation. The air became heavier with rain, the soil richer with nutrients, the world greener with time. The continent that once drained into the Pacific now opened itself to the Atlantic, and through that transformation, South America became something entirely new, a land of rivers that flowed with both memory and renewal. The Amazon's eastward journey began not as a simple redirection, but as the continuation of a story that had already been millions of years in the making. Today, the river's flow still carries the echo of that ancient tilt, a whisper of the moment when the earth turned its gaze from one ocean to another. What once flowed toward sunset now moves eternally toward dawn, connecting the past and present through the quiet persistence of water. The basin's tilt changed, the rivers obeyed, and in doing so, the mountains did something that few forces ever could. They redirected time itself. The first meeting between the Amazon and the Atlantic was not a clash, but a merging, slow, patient, and full of quiet power. For millions of years, the waters of the continent had been searching for a way to escape. They had flowed eastward across the vast basin, carving a path through forest and floodplain, carrying the silt and memory of mountains. At last, they reached the edge of the land. There, at the rim of the continent, the river met the sea, and the two worlds touched for the first time. It must have been a moment both immense and silent. The fresh water, thick with sediment and nutrients, pushed outward from the mouth of the river in a wide brown plume. The salt water of the Atlantic pressed inward with the rhythm of its tides. Between them formed a zone unlike any other on Earth, not river, not ocean, but something in between, a shifting boundary where the two halves of the planet's water learned to share a single space. In this newborn estuary, the world was in motion. The Amazon's fresh water poured out with such volume and force that it stretched far into the sea, coloring the Atlantic for hundreds of kilometers. Even now, from above, that plume can still be seen, a vast stain of ochre and green drifting over the surface of the blue ocean. The mixing of salt and fresh water created gradients of life, layers of salinity and temperature that formed invisible landscapes beneath the surface. It was an environment that changed by the hour, shaped by tides, storms, and the pulse of the river itself. The first creatures to arrive were wanderers from both realms. Marine fish from the open ocean followed the nutrient-rich water inland, drawn by its abundance. River species ventured outward, carried by the current into brackish channels where the air smelled of salt and the light shimmered in new ways. Some perished, unable to survive the change. Others adapted, slowly, over generations, until they belonged to both worlds. This meeting gave birth to a new kind of life. Species that had once been confined to fresh water evolved to tolerate a touch of salt. Some, like certain catfish and stingrays, learned to move freely between the two, traveling with the tides as if following an ancient instinct. Marine creatures such as crabs, shrimps, and mollusks found new homes in the mangrove forests that began to spread along the estuary's edge. These mangroves, with their tangled roots reaching into the water like fingers, stabilized the shifting shoreline and created nurseries for countless young. Above the water, birds followed the transformation. Flocks of wading birds gathered where the tides exposed mudflats rich with life. Pelicans and terns circled where the river met the sea, diving for fish that darted through the mixing currents. Over time, the air grew thick with their calls, and the coast became a living boundary, alive with movement and sound. The river's arrival changed the ocean as much as the ocean changed the river. The constant outflow of fresh water created a layer of low salinity water that stretched far into the Atlantic, carrying nutrients and sediments from deep within the continent. Plankton bloomed in this mixture, turning sunlight into energy that fed the food webs of both river and sea. The Atlantic, in turn, sent its tides up the river's mouth, influencing the rhythms of the basin for thousands of kilometers inland. This exchange of water, minerals, and life transformed the climate of the region. The moisture rising from the estuary fueled clouds that drifted back over the rainforest, feeding the rain that sustained it. The cycle had become complete. Mountains to river, river to ocean, ocean to sky, and back to the land again. It was a conversation that would never end. Over millions of years, this connection deepened. The estuary expanded and shifted, creating one of the largest deltas on Earth. The sediments carried from the Andes continued to pour into the sea, forming sandbanks, islands, and channels that changed with every season. The coast became a place of constant creation, where land and ocean braided together in patterns too complex to ever stay still. Within this ever-changing landscape, evolution continued its slow work. Marine species that entered the estuary found themselves trapped during floods or droughts, forced to adapt to freshwater once more. The process that had once created the dolphins and stingrays of the Pebas Lake repeated itself in a new age, in a new setting. Each change in the land invited another wave of adaptation, another experiment in life's endless dialogue with water. The arrival of the ocean marked not an ending, but a new balance. The great inland lake was gone, but in its place was something even more dynamic, a living threshold between continents and seas. The Amazon River had reached its destination, but in doing so, it had also created a bridge between worlds. Today, that meeting continues every moment. The river still carries the breath of the Andes, the memory of the lake, and the pulse of the rainforest. The Atlantic still rises to meet it, its tides folding gently into the current. Where they touch, the world becomes fluid, timeless, and whole, the fresh water of a continent meeting the salt water of the planet in an eternal embrace that began millions of years ago and has never truly ended. The world that once shimmered with the reflection of an inland sea had turned green. From horizon to horizon, the land breathed again. Forests spread over the former basin, roots sinking deep into the rich sediments left behind by the Pebas Lake. Rivers flowed endlessly through this living web, carrying nutrients, shaping the air, and whispering through the leaves. What had once been still water was now a vast rainforest, alive with motion and sound. As the new forest matured, it began to do something remarkable. It changed the air itself. Each leaf, each blade of grass, and each drop of rain became part of a vast exchange between earth and sky. The plants pulled carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, using the energy of sunlight to build themselves. Wood, bark, fruit, and root. With every breath they took in, the air grew lighter. With every exhale, they released oxygen. The rainforest was not only alive, it was beginning to shape the planet's climate. The transformation of the Pebas, the world into forest, came during the Middle Miocene, a time when Earth was still warm, humid, and lush. The polar ice caps were small, and tropical regions stretched far and wide, yet something subtle began to shift. As the Amazon basin filled with green life, the planet's great cycle of carbon began to slow down. For millions of years, the lake had stored organic material in its sediments, burying the remains of plants and plankton beneath layers of clay. Now, with forests rising where the lake had once stood, an even larger system began to take hold, one that absorbed more carbon than it released. Rain fell over the mountains, carrying dust and minerals down into the lowlands. There, the nutrients fed new generations of trees. The forest grew denser, its canopy thicker, its roots more intricate. In this steady rhythm of growth and decay, the rainforest began to pull vast amounts of carbon out of the air and lock it away in the soil. Each fallen leaf became part of that hidden storage, pressed into the ground by rain and time. Every season, billions of tons of carbon were quietly buried beneath the forest's feet. The Amazon was not alone in this change. Across the planet, other tropical regions were expanding too, responding to the same slow movements of climate and land. In Africa, Asia, and Oceania, great forests mirrored the one now rising in South America. Together, they formed a planetary network of green that worked like a thermostat, regulating the warmth of the earth through breath alone. As these forests grew, the air's chemistry began to change. Carbon dioxide, the invisible gas that traps heat and warms the atmosphere, slowly decreased. The oceans absorbed some of it, the plants absorbed more. Over time, the planet's temperature began to cool. The change was not sudden or dramatic. It took millions of years, unfolding as softly as a dawn, yet its effects were profound. The Miocene, once marked by thick heat, entered a cooler phase. The polar ice sheets expanded. Ocean currents shifted, bringing colder waters to the surface and carrying nutrients across the seas. Wind patterns changed, spreading dust and moisture differently than before. Even the rhythm of rain over the Amazon evolved, becoming part of a global dance of balance. Within this cooler world, life adapted in quiet ways. New species evolved to thrive in the deep shade of the rainforest. Others adapted to the changing conditions at the edges of the forest, where grasslands began to spread. Mammals, birds, and insects filled every niche. The forests hummed with pollinators, predators, and scavengers, each one part of the intricate web that helped the planet maintain its equilibrium. In the soils beneath the rainforest, the old sediments of the Pebas Lake still held their history, layers of mud, fossils, and minerals preserved beneath the roots of trees. Above them, the new forest continued the same ancient work, turning sunlight into life, and life into atmosphere. What had once been a quiet inland sea now functioned as one of the planet's greatest lungs. The connection between land, water, and air grew stronger with each passing millennium. The rise of the Andes fed the rivers fed the forest fed the sky. Moisture lifted into clouds, drifted over the continent, and fell again as rain. In this endless loop, carbon moved in and out of living things, balancing itself in the rhythm of breath. The Amazon basin had become one of Earth's most efficient machines of stability, a natural regulator born from the collapse of an ancient lake. As the planet cooled, its face began to look more like the one we know today. Ice spread farther across the poles. The deep oceans darkened with plankton blooms that fed on nutrients stirred by the cold. The air grew clearer, thinner, easier to breathe. The warmth that had once soaked every corner of the Miocene world softened into a gentler climate, one that allowed forests and grasslands to share the earth in harmony. It is strange to think that the death of a lake could bring such balance, yet the end of Pebas gave rise to something more enduring than water. In its place grew a living system that would hold the planet steady for millions of years. The Amazon, born from the bones of the lake, became a guardian of the air, a quiet, endless pulse that helped cool the earth and keep it alive. And so, through roots and rain, through the chemistry of breath and the passage of time, the planet found its calm again. The great experiment of water had given way to the great experiment of life, and in that transformation, the world learned once more how to keep itself in balance. Beneath the soft hum of the living rainforest, under the roots and soil, where ants tunnel and roots breathe, lies a secret world. It is silent, pressed flat by time, layered in shades of brown, gray, and red. This is the skeleton of the Amazon, not made of bone, but of earth itself. The ancient sediments of the Pebas Lake still rest there, hidden beneath the forest floor, holding the quiet memory of a vanished world. To the eye, the forest seems timeless, as though it has always been what it is now, a maze of green, a chorus of rain and life. But the land beneath tells a longer story. Each layer of sediment is a page in that story, written not with ink but with minerals, pollen, shells, and dust. These layers formed when the Pebas Lake spread across the continent, capturing moments of flood and drought, life and extinction, all preserved in mud that never fully dried. Over millions of years, the weight of new soil pressed these sediments together until they hardened into a record more detailed than any written history. Each stratum marks a shift in the rhythm of the earth. Some are rich with fossilized shells from the ancient lake's calm waters. Others carry the fine grains of volcanic ash blown in from the rising Andes. Some layers gleam faintly with iron, stained red by the breath of oxygen that first touched them when the land began to dry. Today, this buried archive lies hidden beneath one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth. Scientists who study it call these layers core samples, long cylinders of sediment extracted carefully from the ground, each representing millions of years of history. When a drill penetrates the rainforest floor, it passes through modern soil, through roots and humus, through centuries of decayed leaves. Then, suddenly, it enters silence, the untouched layers that have not seen sunlight since before the Amazon River existed. Each core that rises to the surface is like a time capsule. Within it, scientists can read the ancient handwriting of the earth. A few millimeters of dark clay may represent centuries of still water. A sudden shift to coarse sand could mark the arrival of rivers, the first signs of the Pebas Lake retreating. Microscopic fossils, shells of plankton, spores of extinct plants, traces of algae reveal how warm the air once was, how salty the water had become, how long a drought had lasted. Even the smallest grain carries a story. Under powerful microscopes, researchers find the ghosts of life once abundant. Tiny diatoms, shaped like glass sculptures, tell of the light and clarity of the ancient waters. Pollen grains, delicate and perfectly preserved, describe the forests that followed. Some come from plants that still exist today. Others belong to species that disappeared when the climate cooled and the basin dried. Layer by layer, these details create a portrait of a world changing at the slow pace of geology and reborn as something new. What these cores reveal is astonishing. The Pebas sediments are not just mud, they are a memory of motion. They show how rainfall patterns shifted as the Andes rose higher. They record when the Amazon's flow reversed, when the first floods brought the Atlantic's salt inland. They preserve the fingerprints of extinction events, the moments when warming or cooling tipped the balance of entire ecosystems. Every few centimeters holds an age of transformation. When scientists unroll these cores in laboratories, the scent of ancient earth fills the air, faint, mineral, and strange, as though the ground itself is exhaling its past. The texture varies, sometimes fine and smooth like silt, sometimes coarse with embedded shells. Occasionally, fragments of leaves or bone appear, impossibly fragile yet intact. To touch them is to touch time, to feel the weight of millions of years condensed into a single line of earth. Beneath the rainforest, the Pebas sediments continue for hundreds of meters, stacked one atop another like a layered cake. The deeper the drill goes, the further back the story reaches, beyond the river, beyond the forest, back to the inland sea that once shimmered across the continent. The pressure of time has compacted these layers, turning soft mud into stone. Yet inside them, water still moves, slowly seeping through the pores of clay, carrying with it the trace of minerals from ancient mountains. Even now, the land beneath the Amazon is breathing, just at a pace too slow for human eyes to see. The scientists who study these buried worlds speak softly about their findings. Each discovery is fragile, a glimpse into something vast. They can trace how rainfall increased when the forest grew thick, or how temperature dropped when the planet began to cool. They can measure how quickly sediment flowed after the Andes rose, marking the exact moment when the Pebas system began to collapse. These details, written in layers thinner than a leaf, form the autobiography of the rainforest, a record of how water, land, and life became one. Standing in the modern Amazon, with its rivers twisting endlessly beneath the canopy, it is difficult to imagine the world beneath one's feet. Yet every step presses down upon history. The shell beds of the ancient lake, the dust of vanished forests, the mineral breath of volcanoes long gone. Beneath the roots of trees that reach for the sky lies a skeleton made of time, silent, vast, and patient. It is a reminder that the rainforest did not begin as forest at all, but as water. Its story is written not only in what lives above, but also in what sleeps below, compacted and preserved in the bones of the earth itself. The Amazon's hidden skeleton remains there still, holding within it the memory of an age when the heart of South America was a sea, and the future was waiting quietly beneath the mud. Every so often, deep in the heart of the Amazon basin, a discovery rises out of the earth that changes everything we thought we knew. A fragment of bone, a tooth the size of a thumb, a shell imprinted in stone, small pieces of ancient lives that once moved through the Pebas world. Each fossil pulled from the ground is not just a relic, but a sentence in Earth's long story, waiting to be read. And with every new discovery, that story becomes more intricate, more connected, and far more surprising than anyone once imagined. When the first fossils of the Pebas world were uncovered, scientists believed they were glimpsing a self-contained ecosystem, a world that evolved in isolation after South America split from the supercontinent of Gondwana. It seemed logical. The Andes had risen, sealing the basin. Oceans were far away. What could possibly have reached those inland waters? But the deeper researchers dug, the more complicated the picture became. In the soft layers of ancient mud, they began finding creatures that should not have been there. Fossils of mollusks, snails, and fish that shared uncanny similarities with species once found in Africa. Bones of turtles and crocodilians that bore features linking them not only to South American lineages, but to families that had once thrived across the Atlantic. The evidence whispered of connections long severed, traces of migration that defied the idea of isolation. One of the most revealing clues came from the shells of tiny freshwater snails. Under microscopes, their coiled spirals and ridged surfaces matched almost perfectly with species that had lived in Africa during the same period. These patterns could not have evolved twice by coincidence. It suggested that, in the distant past, long before the Andes rose high enough to block the way, water routes or brief land bridges had allowed species to cross from one continent to another. The Atlantic, which today stretches like an endless divide, had once been narrow, enough for life to drift between its shores. Other fossils told stories of marine incursions from the north. Some fish and mollusk species found within Pebas sediments share features with ancient Caribbean lineages. Their presence meant that at certain times, saltwater had pushed deep into the heart of South America, linking the inland lake to the sea. The basin was not a closed bowl, but a dynamic network of waterways that opened and closed with shifting climates and rising lands. These moments of connection allowed species to wander, adapt, and exchange their genetic blueprints across vast distances. Each new fossil discovery added a note to this evolving song of connection. Teeth from extinct species of river dolphins revealed traits shared with early oceanic ancestors, showing how these mammals had once swum freely through salt water before becoming creatures of rivers. Fossilized remains of crocodilians hinted at even older ties, reaching back to species that once glided through African deltas when the continents were still neighbors. The more scientists pieced these clues together, the more the Pebas system began to look like a living crossroads, a meeting place of worlds that were slowly drifting apart. This idea reshaped how we think about evolution itself. Isolation, once thought to be the main driver of diversity in the Amazon, may have only been part of the story. Connection played an equal role. The constant opening and closing of waterways, the rise and fall of sea levels, the pulse of tectonic change, all created pathways for species to mingle, separate, and reunite. Life did not evolve in stillness, but in motion, adapting to the rhythm of a planet that never stopped shifting beneath it. In laboratories far from the rainforest, scientists study these fossils with technologies that reveal even more of their secrets. Under scanning microscopes, the inner structure of bones shows how creatures grew, what they ate, and how they lived. Chemical traces, locked within fossilized teeth, record the salinity of the water they once swam through, whether it was fresh, brackish, or marine. Isotopes in the shells tell stories of ancient climates, revealing how warm the Pebas waters once were and how often they changed. In this way, the fossils speak not only of anatomy, but of environment, of time, and of movement. Every discovery rewrites a small part of the Amazon's origin. It reminds us that the forest, for all its vastness and mystery, is the latest chapter in a much older saga. Beneath the soil, beneath the trees and rivers, lies the memory of a place that was never truly cut off from the rest of the world. The animals that once swam there carried within them the blueprints of both oceans and continents. Some of their descendants still live today, in forms reshaped by time: river dolphins, armored catfish, and turtles that trace their ancestry back to the Pebas waters. The fossils also hint at something deeper, something almost poetic, that even when continents drift apart, life finds ways to bridge the distance. Seeds carried by wind or bird, eggs floating on ocean currents, a temporary land bridge revealed by a low sea. The world's boundaries, though vast, are never absolute. When paleontologists brush away the soil from a newly found fossil, they are not uncovering something dead, but awakening a story that has been sleeping for millions of years. Each bone and shell adds another layer of understanding, another connection across oceans and ages. Together, they reveal a truth both simple and profound, that the Amazon, in all its richness, was never just the child of one continent, but the heir to a global lineage, a living memory of worlds that once touched, drifted apart, and left their stories written quietly in stone beneath the roots of the forest. The Andes rise like a spine along the western edge of South America, their peaks stretching for thousands of kilometers, their shadows long enough to shape the fate of an entire continent. From space, they appear as a single folded scar of stone, but their story began far beneath the surface, where plates of earth grind, collide, and lift the land skyward grain by grain. The Andes were not born in a single instant. They grew in silence, pushed upward over tens of millions of years, their height sculpted by heat, pressure, and time, a mountain range that would one day decide the destiny of everything around it. Before the Andes, South America was open, flat, and fluid. Its rivers flowed westward toward the Pacific, its air drifted freely across plains and lowlands, and its seasons moved in gentle patterns. When the mountains began to rise, everything changed. Each new fold of rock forced the winds to climb higher, cooling and condensing the air into clouds. Rain began to fall on one side of the mountains, leaving the other side dry. The Andes divided the continent not only by stone, but by water and climate. They became both wall and wellspring. As the mountains lifted higher, they began to sculpt the atmosphere itself. Moist air from the Atlantic traveled inland, heavy with vapor drawn from the growing forests. When it reached the rising peaks, it was forced upward, where cooler temperatures turned it into rain. The eastern slopes became drenched, feeding thousands of rivers that flowed back across the continent. Over centuries, this rainfall carved valleys, shaped soils, and nourished the expanding Amazon basin. On the western side, however, the air descended dry, stripped of its moisture. There, deserts began to form, vast, silent expanses like the Atacama, some of the driest places on Earth. The Andes had become a line that separated life from stillness. Every drop of water that fell on their eastern slopes became part of a journey that led eventually to the Atlantic, and every shadow they cast shaped wind and temperature far beyond their peaks. Their presence cooled the interior of the continent, altering the global balance of air. The high altitude of the mountains deflected atmospheric currents, creating new paths for wind and weather across the southern hemisphere. Even oceans felt their influence. By lifting so high, the Andes also changed the way Earth breathed. The rocks exposed along their slopes were young and unweathered, rich in minerals. As rainwater flowed across them, chemical reactions drew carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, locking it into stone and sediment. Over millions of years, this slow process acted as a planetary thermostat, helping to stabilize the planet's temperature. The Andes were not only architects of landscapes, but quiet regulators of the world's climate, mountains that cooled the air as they grew. The rivers that poured from their eastern side became the arteries of the continent, fed by glacial melt and constant rain. They carried sediments rich in nutrients into the lowlands. These minerals, washed from ancient rock, nourished the forests that spread across the Amazon. The mountains fed the trees, and the trees, in turn, fed the sky. Moisture evaporated from the leaves and rose again into clouds, drifting back toward the Andes to fall once more as rain. It was a perfect loop, mountain to river, river to forest, forest to sky, sky to mountain. High in the Andes, glaciers gleamed under the sun, their surfaces reflecting the sky. They were more than ice, they were time made visible. Within their frozen layers, each snowfall from thousands of years was preserved, each thin band recording a moment in Earth's weather. When those glaciers melted, they released not just water, but history, sending ancient memory flowing down to the forests below. The Andes also shaped life in ways that rippled across evolution. As the mountains rose, they created new environments, cold, oxygen-thin plateaus where only the hardiest species could survive. Plants adapted to the high altitudes, forming tough leaves and deep roots. Birds evolved broader wings and larger lungs to cross the thin air. On the lower slopes, forests climbed upward in response to the changing climate, forming layered ecosystems that shifted with elevation. Every meter of height became a new world, a new opportunity for life to reinvent itself. Even beyond South America, the Andes reached into the wider workings of the planet. Their height and position influenced the pattern of global winds, altering the flow of the jet streams that circle the Earth. They helped shape the monsoons that water distant lands and the currents that move through the Southern Ocean. Through the slow choreography of plate tectonics, a single mountain chain had become a planetary force, touching both sky and sea. If one could stand on a peak at dawn and look east, the view would stretch across cloud forests, valleys, and the endless green of the Amazon basin. The air would shimmer with moisture rising from the forest below, drifting back toward the mountains like breath returning to its source. That cycle, between peak and plain, between stone and leaf, is the heartbeat of South America. The Andes are still rising today, though the movement is too slow for the human eye to see. With each tremor deep underground, the continent shifts slightly, continuing a process that began tens of millions of years ago. The mountains remain what they have always been, builders of rivers, shapers of climates, and quiet engineers of life. Beneath their peaks, the forests still depend on their rain, their minerals, and their shadow. Above them, clouds still gather in homage to their height. In their vast silence, the Andes hold the memory of every stage the continent has passed through, lake, forest, and river. They are the architects of a world remade by their rise, a spine of earth that turned the direction of water, the rhythm of wind, and the course of life itself. The Amazon we see today is alive and ever-changing, yet beneath its surface lies a ghost that never left. The Pebas Lake, long vanished, still breathes quietly through the land. Though its waters drained millions of years ago, its shape remains etched into the continent, guiding rivers, nourishing forests, and whispering through the life that came after. Every tree, every stream, and every shadow of green carries the memory of that ancient sea. If one could peel away the forest canopy and look beneath the soil, the past would appear like a faint reflection beneath still water. The land still holds the shape of the lake that once drowned it. The great basin of the Amazon follows the outline of Pebas almost perfectly, as if the lake's ghost carved the map for the world that would replace it. The lowlands, where water once pooled, still dip gently, and the high ridges that once bordered its shores now cradle the flow of modern rivers. Hidden deep underground are the aquifers, vast, secret reservoirs of water that trace the same curves the Pebas Lake once did. These aquifers are not relics of stillness. They are living veins that move beneath the forest floor, connecting one region to another in slow, silent motion. Rainfall seeps into them from above, filtered through centuries of soil and root. Some of that water has been trapped for tens of thousands of years, older than the rainforest itself. Scientists studying their shape were startled to find that they mirror the ancient lake's outline, as though the land never forgot the paths that water once took. In places where Pebas once reached its deepest points, the soil remains unusually rich. Sediments that settled quietly on the lake floor now feed the roots of towering trees. These old deposits, packed with minerals and ancient organic matter, became the foundation of the Amazon's fertility. Even after millions of years, they still nourish life. In this way, the lake's final act was to prepare the ground for the forest that would grow in its place, a gift from water to wood. The forest itself has adapted to the memory of water. Many of the Amazon's plants and animals thrive in seasonal floods that mimic the ebb and flow of the ancient lake. When the rivers rise, vast areas of the forest are submerged, and trees that once had ancestors growing in the shallows of Pebas now bend gracefully beneath the current. Their roots are built to breathe underwater, their seeds to float. Fish swim among their trunks, feeding on fruits that drop into the flooded forest. Life learned long ago to move with the rhythm of returning water. Even the rivers that cut through the forest today carry echoes of the old world. Some follow the outlines of the channels that once connected Pebas to the sea. Others wind across former shorelines where beaches hardened into stone. When scientists map these waterways, they see traces of the ancient network beneath them, a pattern of flow that has never fully disappeared. These buried channels often host extraordinary biodiversity. In the wetlands and oxbow lakes that sit atop them, life gathers in abundance. Strange fish, rare amphibians, and delicate aquatic plants flourish in places that still remember what it means to be a lake. In the central basin, the land remains so flat and waterlogged that it almost seems the ancient lake might return at any moment. During the rainy season, when rivers swell and floodplain forests vanish beneath the rising water, the landscape briefly becomes what it once was, a single, shimmering expanse stretching to the horizon. Birds skim across its surface, dolphins surface in flooded groves. The past seems to breathe again, just for a while, before the waters recede and the forest returns. But Pebas's legacy is not only written in water, it lives in the patterns of life itself. Many species that dominate the Amazon today evolved from ancestors that once swam in its ancient lake. River dolphins, stingrays, and manatees still carry traits shaped by that watery world. Even plants that now cling to the riverbanks trace their lineage back to those that grew along the lake's shores. Evolution, it seems, has a long memory. Modern technology has only deepened our understanding of this buried inheritance. From space, satellite images reveal faint outlines in the land, curved depressions, ghostly arcs, and sediment rings that match the boundaries of the old lake system. Below the forest floor, geologists use sonar and seismic imaging to map its buried bones. Layers of silt, ancient shorelines, and long-dried deltas still preserved beneath newer sediments. To the instruments, the Pebas world is still there, just hidden beneath the pulse of green. Yet the most profound reminder of Pebas lies not in fossils or maps, but in the forest's rhythm. The way rain falls, gathers, and returns to the sky follows a cycle that began when this land was water. The trees breathe moisture upward, forming clouds that drift back toward the Andes, fall as rain, and feed the rivers again. The basin still moves in the same slow heartbeat that once stirred the lake's surface. The form has changed, but the pattern endures. Beneath the songs of insects and the murmur of rivers, the Pebas Lake still lingers in silence, shaping the life that flourishes above it. The Amazon grows upon its memory, a living forest rooted in ancient water. The past has not vanished here. It has simply transformed, its echoes flowing through soil, sky, and leaf, guiding the world that came after. And somewhere, Deep beneath the roots, the earth still remembers the time when all of this was sea. The Amazon feels eternal, as though it has always been here, a breathing ocean of green, ancient, and inevitable. But deep beneath its calm persistence lies a truth that feels almost fragile. The world we know today, the endless rainforest stretching from the Andes to the Atlantic, could easily have been something else. It could have remained a vast inland sea, shimmering beneath a tropical sun, its surface rippling where giant reptiles once swam. The modern Amazon was never promised. It was balanced on the edge of chance. In Earth's long history, the smallest changes can alter the destiny of entire continents. A shift in the angle of uplift, a degree more or less of rainfall, a fault line moving slightly faster or slower, these are the quiet decisions that shape worlds. During the time when the Andes were rising and the Pebas Lake covered northern South America, the planet's future hung on such delicate possibilities. If the Andes had lifted a little slower, the westward escape for the basin's water might never have closed. The Pebas System could have remained open to the Pacific, its tides and river deltas feeding a stable inland sea. Rainfall, trapped in this vast bowl, might have deepened the lake instead of draining it. The region could have become a permanent wetland world, a maze of lagoons and deltas stretching for thousands of kilometers, a continent defined not by forest, but by water. Imagine it. Instead of a sea of trees, an inland ocean gleaming like a mirror beneath the clouds, sunlight scattering across wide surfaces where fresh water met brine, shores lined with reeds and mangroves instead of towering sea ebas, air heavy with the scent of algae, not leaves, birds calling across open water, not hidden among canopies, dolphins gliding in silence where jaguars would never prowl. If the Andes had stopped rising just a few million years earlier, this is what South America might still be, a continent of endless lakes and slow rivers, a world of water instead of wood. But uplift continued, slowly and relentlessly. The Andes became taller, their peaks sharper, their mass heavier. Gravity pulled at the land, forcing the basin to tilt eastward. The outlet that might have fed Pebas to the Pacific was cut off forever. Water began to drain not towards sunset, but towards sunrise. What had once been a still sea began to move, piece by piece, until it became a river. Yet even this was a narrow escape. The climate, too, could have turned the other way. If rainfall had weakened just slightly, the vast basin might have dried out before the rainforest could take root. The fertile sediments left behind by the shrinking Pebas could have hardened into salt flats or desert. Dust might have blown across a barren plain where forest now breathes. The Amazon could have become an echo of what it once was, not a green pulse of life, but a dry reminder of a lost inland sea. Even today, evidence of how close that alternate world came still lies hidden. Beneath the forest floor, layers of ancient clay mark moments when the basin nearly tipped toward drought. In other layers, thick deposits of aquatic fossils record the times when water tried to return. The earth seemed to hesitate, unsure of whether to remain ocean or forest. For thousands of years, the land wavered between the two, caught between stillness and flow. Eventually, balance leaned toward the forest, and the transformation began in earnest. Seeds found new ground where lake mud once lay. Roots took hold in soft, mineral-rich soil. Trees grew where waves had lapped. But it was not destiny, it was coincidence, guided by angles, temperatures, and chance. The same geological hand that had drowned the land in water now raised it just high enough to breathe. When scientists study the sediments and fossils of the Pebas world, they often speak of this fragile balance. The basin's history is not a simple story of change from lake to river, but of near misses and narrow margins. A few centimeters more of uplift, a slightly different monsoon pattern, or a pause in the Earth's long tectonic rhythm could have frozen the landscape in an entirely different state. The result would have been a planet with no Amazon rainforest, no lungs of the world, no vast green canopy feeding the air with oxygen and rain. It is humbling to think that one of Earth's most vital ecosystems owes its existence to the quiet precision of natural balance. The Andes rose just enough, the rains fell just long enough, the lake drained at just the right pace, each moment aligned perfectly for forest to replace flood, for life to climb out of water and reach for the sun. If that balance had slipped even slightly, the map of South America, and perhaps the story of life itself, would look utterly different. The rhythms of rainfall, the patterns of global wind, even the oxygen that fills our lungs today would not be the same. What now stands as a cathedral of life could have been a sea of silence. And so, beneath every drop of rain that falls in the Amazon, beneath every tree that stretches upward, there lingers a quiet truth. This world was almost something else. The rainforest is not a certainty, but a miracle of timing, a fragile harmony between rock, water, and air that the earth achieved only once, and only barely. The Amazon that almost wasn't still lives in the soil, in the ancient shape of the land, and in the fossils that remember when this place was ocean. The forest grows upon that memory, a living tribute to chance, to all the things that could have gone differently, but didn't. Deep beneath the emerald canopy of the Amazon, where the air hums softly with life and the rivers move like breathing veins, there flows an ancient inheritance, hidden not in stone or soil, but in the code of life itself. The Pebas Lake, long gone from the surface, never truly vanished. Its legacy lingers in the living, in the genes of creatures that still swim, crawl, and sing through this green labyrinth. Within their cells lies the quiet memory of water, written in patterns older than the forest that now surrounds them. When the Pebas Lake drained away, its world did not end. The animals that once belonged to that vast inland sea faced a slow and unrelenting change. Their watery empire turned to floodplain and forest, their homes shrinking into rivers, swamps, and seasonal pools. But instead of disappearing, many adapted. Generation after generation, they rewrote themselves to match the shifting world around them, carrying with them a whisper of the past in their blood. One of the most remarkable heirs of that lost lake glides today through the muddy rivers of the Amazon, the pink river dolphin, known as the boto. Its ancestors were oceanic, creatures of salt water that once roamed the coasts of prehistoric South America. Fossil evidence shows that millions of years ago, during the Pebas era, these dolphins swam far inland through channels that connected the sea to the Great Lake. When the lake became trapped and the ocean withdrew, some dolphins remained behind. Cut off from their saltwater world, they adapted slowly to freshwater, their bodies reshaping over time. The boto's flexible neck, unlike that of its ocean cousins, allows it to twist gracefully through flooded forests, weaving between roots and branches. Its gentle pink hue, sometimes brightening with excitement or exertion, is the faint echo of capillaries close to the surface of its skin, a feature of evolution shaped not for the sea, but for the slow-moving rivers of the forest. Its sonar, finely tuned to navigate through murky waters, remembers a life once lived in the clearer shallows of Pebas. Every movement of the boto is a survival song written in deep time, a melody born from the meeting of lake and forest. Alongside them, freshwater stingrays still glide across the riverbeds, their ancestors too once belonging to the sea. Fossils reveal that stingrays swam through the Pebas Lake, feeding on small fish and crustaceans in its shifting brackish waters. When the sea retreated, these rays remained, their descendants evolving into forms that now live exclusively in freshwater. The species that fill the Amazon today, with their elegant shapes and spotted patterns, are direct descendants of those that once floated through Pebas's shallows. Even their ability to tolerate different salinities hints at their marine ancestry, a trace of the ocean that shaped them. Manatees, too, carry the signature of that drowned world. These gentle giants, slow moving and endlessly calm, once grazed along the shores of the Pebas wetlands. Like the dolphins and rays, they had oceanic roots. When the lake's connections to the sea closed, a few manatees became stranded inland. Over time, they evolved to thrive entirely within freshwater, feeding on aquatic plants that grew in the flooded plains. Today's Amazonian manatee still carries those ancient traits: lungs shaped for long dives, and a metabolism suited for calm, warm water. It moves with the same unhurried rhythm that once ruled the Pebas Basin, a living echo of that forgotten age. Even creatures far smaller bear this inheritance. Certain catfish species in the Amazon carry genetic lineages tracing back to the Pebas era. Their DNA reveals that their ancestors once swam in the lake's complex network of wetlands before adapting to modern rivers. Some species, found only in isolated parts of the basin today, still show genetic patterns suggesting ancient migration routes through Pebas channels that no longer exist. The genetic map of the Amazon is, in many ways, a submerged world brought back to light, a living record of where water once flowed. Plants, too, hold fragments of this memory. Many species of aquatic and semi-aquatic plants that line the Amazon's floodplains evolved from ancestors that once grew along Pebas's shores. Their seeds, adapted to drift and survive long submersion, remain perfectly suited to the forest's yearly floods. Even the rhythm of the rainforest, its cycles of rain and rise and retreating water, resonates with the ancient pulse of that lake, repeating an old pattern written into life long before the first tree took root. Modern genetics has given scientists a way to trace these echoes. When researchers compare the DNA of Amazonian species to those found in Africa or the Caribbean, faint but undeniable similarities appear, remnants of the time when Pebas briefly connected those worlds. These genetic bridges show that evolution never forgets. Even after millions of years, life still carries the footprints of where it has been. What is most extraordinary is that the Pebas Lake, though gone, continues to shape evolution even now. The same flood cycles that define the Amazon recreate, on a smaller scale, the shifting balance of land and water that once ruled the Pebas Basin. Fish and mammals adapt to these changes each generation, passing forward instincts and traits that first appeared in a world drowned long ago. Beneath the forest's soundscape, the drumming rain, the buzzing insects, the quiet breath of leaves, there is another rhythm. It moves unseen, within every cell and strand of DNA, a pulse that began in an ancient lake and continues in every living thing that calls the Amazon home. The genes of the drowned world are still alive, flowing quietly through time, carried in blood, seed, and bone. The Pebas Lake may have vanished from the surface of the earth, but it never truly disappeared. It simply learned to live again, as forest, as river, as life. Far below the soft hum of the modern rainforest, beneath roots and rivers and layers of soil, lie the quiet archives of the earth. Each layer of sediment in the Amazon basin is a page written in the language of water and time, a record of how the world once changed and how it might change again. Within those ancient cores, geologists are learning that the story of the Pebas Lake is not only one of the past, it is a mirror, a reflection of what the future might hold. When scientists extract cores from the basin, they pull from the ground long cylinders of layered earth, each one stretching like a timeline through millions of years. The deepest layers belong to the age when the Pebas Lake still shimmered across the continent. Above them lie the sediments that mark its slow retreat, its transformation into river and forest. Every shift in color, texture, and mineral content is a clue, a whisper from a time when rainfall, temperature, and life itself changed in rhythm with the Earth's breath. Under microscopes, the details emerge. Grains of pollen tell when the region was covered in aquatic plants or when dry spells allowed shrubs and grasses to appear. The shells of tiny diatoms, microscopic algae that thrive in water, reveal how saline the lake once was and how quickly it freshened as rain increased. Traces of dust show when the air grew dry and winds carried sediments from the Andes across a parched landscape. In each detail lies a pattern of transformation: water rising, water fading, land awakening beneath it. Geologists reading these layers see not only a vanished world but a cycle, one that connects directly to the present. The Pebas system did not disappear by accident. It changed because rainfall patterns shifted, mountain heights altered the winds, and global temperatures began to cool. What began as a slow, almost invisible adjustment in weather eventually became a continental transformation. The same subtle forces are still at work today, shaping the balance between forest and flood, between life and drought. Modern instruments, more sensitive than any before, now allow researchers to compare those ancient records with the present climate. Satellites watch the Amazon's cloud patterns drift, rain gauges record each drop, and temperature models trace the flow of air across oceans. When these modern observations are placed beside the records hidden in Pebas mud, the similarities are striking. The same fluctuations in rainfall that once drowned the basin or drained it can be seen repeating in smaller, quieter ways today. In the sediments, scientists find layers that speak of long, dry periods, centuries when rain fell less often, when fires may have swept across exposed ground, and when the basin's balance leaned toward collapse. Above those are thicker bands of clay, deposited when rains returned with force and the land was once again submerged. The rhythm between these two extremes, drought and flood, silence and storm, repeats over and over in the core. It is the Earth's slow pulse, steady yet unpredictable. By studying these patterns, scientists can glimpse what might come next. The Pebas sediments reveal that even small changes in rainfall, stretched over centuries, can reshape an entire ecosystem. A shift of just a few degrees in global temperature or a small decrease in precipitation once turned lakes into plains and forests into grasslands. The Amazon today, though vast and green, rests upon that same delicate threshold. The clues hidden in the Pebas cores have become tools for understanding modern climate risk. By comparing the chemical signatures of ancient carbon and oxygen in those layers, researchers can estimate how past temperatures rose or fell and how those changes affected rainfall. These natural archives help refine the models that predict what will happen as our planet warms again. In the fingerprints of old mud, we see how sensitive the Amazon has always been to imbalance. The lessons are humbling. The Pebas world did not vanish overnight. It changed slowly, inch by inch, drop by drop. To its inhabitants, those changes would have seemed invisible. A slightly lower shoreline, a longer dry season, a shallower pool where fish once swam, but over the span of millions of years, those small shifts reshaped an entire continent. The fossils and sediments that remain show that Earth's great transformations rarely begin with catastrophe. They begin with quiet adjustments carried by time and water. Today, scientists find that the same rhythm may already be stirring again. Certain regions of the Amazon experience longer dry seasons. Rivers run lower in some years, while others flood more than before. The cycle of rain that feeds the forest appears to be changing its tone. The sediments remind us that the basin has walked this path before, that when water leaves or lingers too long, the land responds in kind. Still, There is comfort in this continuity. The earth endures, through renewal as much as through loss. The Pebas Lake gave way to the forest, and the forest became one of the planet's greatest engines of life. Each transformation carries within it the seed of what comes next. The sediments beneath our feet record not only endings, but the resilience of worlds that find new ways to breathe. As scientists continue to read those ancient pages, they find the same lesson repeated across time. Earth does not forget its rhythms. It moves in slow circles, revisiting its old states with new forms and new life. The Pebas Lake once became the Amazon. One day, perhaps, the forest will become something else. But in every transformation, the memory of what came before endures, layered, silent, and waiting beneath the soil, reminding us that the story of this planet is written in cycles and that even the quietest changes can echo for millions of years. The rain begins softly, as it always has, a quiet shimmer descending through the leaves. It gathers on the canopy, drips to the forest floor, and seeps into the waiting soil. Each droplet carries a secret older than the trees it touches, for within the rain and within the rivers it becomes lies a memory that stretches back millions of years, a memory of a world drowned in stillness, when this land was not a forest, but a sea. Every flood, every downpour, every wandering branch of the Amazon carries that memory forward. The river is not a new creation, nor a sudden birth from stone and rain. It is the continuation of something ancient, a slow, unbroken story written in water. What was once the Pebas Lake did not vanish when the Andes rose and the land drained. It simply changed shape, reshaping itself into the rivers, swamps, and channels that now lace through the heart of South America. The Amazon, in its endless flow, is the lake reborn in motion. When the rains fall over the past, Andes, they begin the same journey that countless drops have taken since the beginning of this transformation. The clouds rise from the Atlantic, heavy with vapor drawn from the forest's own breath, drift westward, and release their burden over the mountains. From there, the water finds its way down through valleys and ravines, carving paths that were once the edges of the old lake's basin. It moves through stone shaped by ancient tides, through sediments that once rested beneath the Pebas waters. Even as it rushes downhill, the river follows the contours left behind by its predecessor, tracing the memory of a vanished world. The Amazon's floods, which spread across the lowlands each year, echo the rhythms of that ancient inland sea. During the rainy season, the forest becomes an ocean again. Trees stand knee-deep in brown, swirling water. Fish swim through their branches. Birds nest in flooded trunks, their reflections gliding across submerged roots. The air smells of soil and dye, algae, the same mingling of scents that once drifted above the Pebas wetlands. And when the floods retreat, they leave behind layers of fine silt, the same kind of fertile sediment that once settled at the bottom of the ancient lake. Each flood is a reenactment of a memory, a small echo of the time when the land was still learning to breathe. If one could follow a single droplet from sky to sea, it would pass through countless chapters of that memory. It might fall on a leaf, slide down into a stream, and join a river that winds for thousands of kilometers. Along the way, it would meet others, merging into a flow that becomes deeper and older with every bend. The river's journey mirrors that of time itself, slow, patient, and unending, and by the time that droplet reaches the Atlantic, it will have crossed the same path that the Pebas Lake once covered, now transformed into motion and life. Scientists have discovered that this memory is more than poetic. The sediments at the bottom of the modern Amazon still contain traces of the minerals, shells, and organic matter from that ancient inland sea. Microscopic fossils, long dead, are carried along by the river's current, joining the living plankton and drifting downstream together. Even the chemical makeup of the Amazon's water, its balance of nutrients and dissolved elements, carries signatures from the Pebas system that once fed this basin. The water remembers its origins, not through words or images, but through its composition, its chemistry, its flow. And just as water remembers the past, the land remembers its touch. The river does not move randomly across the continent. It carves and recarves the same corridors that water has followed for millions of years. Beneath the forest floor, hidden channels of groundwater trace the outlines of old shorelines. In satellite images, faint arcs and depressions reveal where the Pebas waters once pooled. The earth still bears the fingerprints of the lake that shaped it, and the river continues to follow those prints quietly, faithfully. To watch the Amazon today is to witness a living memory. Its tributaries, weaving across thousands of kilometers, still mimic the ancient branching of the Pebas Delta. Its seasonal floods, rising and falling with the pulse of the year, mirror the ancient tides that once reached deep inland. Even the life that fills it, from the pink dolphins gliding beneath its surface to the catfish tracing its muddy bottom, carries within it the genetic echoes of the creatures that once swam in stiller, saltier waters. The line between past and present dissolves here, as it always has in water. In the language of geology, time is measured in stone, but in the language of life, it is written in flow. The Amazon is that flow, not merely a river, but a continuation of the planet's long dialogue with itself. It is the same water, endlessly circulating through different forms, remembering every mountain it has touched, every basin it has filled, every creature it has carried. When rain falls tonight over the rainforest, it may feel new, fresh, fleeting, momentary. Yet that same water has fallen before, countless times, across countless ages. It has filled oceans, rivers, and clouds. It has risen as vapor and returned as rain. It has seen the Pebas Lake shimmer beneath ancient skies, and now it glides through a world of green. The river that moves beneath the forest canopy is not only the Amazon, it is every flood that ever was, every storm that ever passed, every ancient tide that refused to fade. It is the memory of water itself, written in motion, flowing through time. The Amazon seems endless, a living ocean of green stretching across the horizon, its mist rising like breath from the lungs of the planet. To those who see it today, it feels eternal, as though it has always been this way and always will be. But the forest, like the world beneath it, is never still. It moves in cycles older than memory, changing shape as Earth shifts around it. The past is written in its soil, and in that record lies a quiet warning for the future. The same land that now carries the world's greatest river once held a vast lake, wide and still, where freshwater dolphins and giant turtles swam. Over millions of years, rain and mountain and time reshaped that lake into the forest we know. But even now, as the forest hums with life, the balance remains fragile. The patterns that once flooded the continent or dried it into plains are stirring again. Only this time, the cause may not be tectonic or volcanic, but human. Scientists studying the climate of the Amazon often speak in probabilities, in models, and percentages. But beneath those numbers lies a simple truth. The Amazon's past shows how easily the basin can change. What once took millions of years, the transformation from lake to forest, could now unfold in centuries, or even decades, as the planet warms. Each year, satellites capture the forest thinning. Where green once stretched unbroken for thousands of kilometers, clearings now glow pale and dry beneath the sun. Roads cut through the canopy like scars, opening the way for logging and farms. When trees fall, the soil beneath them, ancient and delicate, begins to heat and crumble. Without shade, the ground dries faster and rivers lose their moisture to the sky. The cycle that once sustained the Amazon begins to reverse, not slowly, as before, but with human speed. The Amazon's climate is self-sustaining. Its trees release moisture into the air, forming clouds that drift westward and fall again as rain. The forest makes its own weather, but when too many trees are lost, that system falters. With less evaporation, fewer clouds form, rains weaken, streams shrink. In some regions, the dry season now lasts weeks longer than it once did, and as the atmosphere warms, heat draws more water from the soil, leaving behind dust where roots once reached. In the Pebas age, the basin changed because mountains rose and rainfall shifted. Today, the same kind of transformation could happen again, but for different reasons. If the drying continues, scientists warn that parts of the Amazon may begin to resemble the grasslands of Africa. The soil, once rich with ancient sediments, could harden. Trees adapted to constant moisture might die back, replaced by scrub and savanna. The change would not be sudden, but it would be steady, like the slow retreat of an ancient tide. And yet, the opposite remains possible. As the atmosphere warms, it also grows heavier with water vapor. Some climate models suggest that storms could become stronger and floods more frequent. Rivers that once stayed within their banks may begin to spill outward, turning valleys into lakes once again. The forest could partially drown, returning, in its own way, to the memory of the Pebas world. The basin could swing between flood and drought, between the ghosts of water and the shadow of dryness, before finding a new balance. Either way, the lesson is the same. The Amazon will not stay as it is. It never has. The earth is a storyteller that rewrites itself endlessly, reshaping every chapter with the passing of time. The question, then, is not whether the Amazon can change, but whether we will recognize it when it does, whether we will see in its transformation the reflection of our own choices. Already, the forest speaks in quiet signals. The songs of insects shift as seasons stretch and shorten. The migration paths of birds alter, following the scent of rain that no longer falls where it once did. Rivers, once thick and brown, carry clearer water. In some regions, a sign that erosion has slowed as upstream rains fade. Elsewhere, floods arrive earlier, cutting through villages and washing away soil that took centuries to form. Every sound, every motion, every breath of wind through the canopy seems to echo the same thought. The balance is moving. But if the Amazon's history teaches anything, it is that change and renewal are intertwined. The same forces that once drowned the land also made it fertile. The same sediments that buried the Pebas Lake became the soil that feeds the forest today. Even in its transformations, the earth creates. The question is not whether life will continue, but what form it will take and how much of the old world will remain to guide the new one. When rain falls over the basin tonight, each droplet will carry the memory of what came before: the lake, the forest, the floods, the dry spells. It will sink into the soil, join the roots, and rise again as vapor to begin the cycle anew. The story will continue, as it always has. But in the quiet rhythm of that rain lies a choice, one written not in sediment, but in action. Whether we allow this chapter to unfold gently as part of the planet's timeless rhythm, or force it into a new and unrecognizable shape. The Amazon has transformed before. It will transform again. The only question that remains is whether we will notice the change while there is still time to understand it, to remember that this forest, vast and green, is not permanent, but living, and like all living things, capable of being lost. The story of the earth has never been one of permanence. It is written not in stone but in movement. Mountains rise and crumble, Oceans form and fade. Forests take root, then vanish into plains and deserts. Every living thing, from the smallest grain of pollen to the largest river, is a moment in that long and patient rhythm. The Amazon, vast and alive as it seems today, is only the latest expression of this rhythm, the newest verse in a poem that has been flowing for millions of years. When we look at the rainforest, it feels timeless. The sound of water moving through roots, the call of distant birds, the shimmer of mist rising from green, it all seems ancient, beyond change. But the ground beneath those trees remembers everything. It remembers when this place was open water, when waves brushed the edges of what is now jungle. It remembers when giant reptiles swam through its channels and when the land was bare and dry. The Amazon is both ancient and new, built from the remains of what came before, shaped by the same slow forces that will one day reshape it again. Nothing in nature stands still for long. Even when it seems quiet, change is working beneath the surface, in the drift of continents, in the slow turning of the climate, in the quiet adaptation of life itself. Every drop of rain that falls carries minerals once locked in mountains. Every gust of wind moves grains of dust that may one day become stone. The world is constantly rewriting itself, erasing and redrawing its lines, yet always guided by the same steady hand of time. The Amazon is a living reflection of this truth. Its trees breathe in carbon and release oxygen, slowly cooling the planet as they grow. Its roots hold water that will soon return to the air as rain. Even death here becomes renewal. Fallen leaves dissolve into the soil, feeding new life. Old rivers dry, leaving behind paths for new ones to follow. Every part of the forest exists within this continuous exchange, giving, receiving, and transforming. In that cycle, permanence is not the goal. Continuity is. Throughout the ages, life has learned to survive not by resisting change, but by becoming part of it. The ancestors of modern dolphins once swam in the freshwater lakes of the Pebas System, and when those waters drained, they followed the new rivers, adapting to the changing flow. Plants that once grew on the lake's muddy banks evolved to thrive in flooded forests. Fish learned to breathe air. Each transformation, however quiet, was a form of memory carried forward, not an ending, but an adaptation. The same is true for every world that has come and gone. Long before the Pebas Lake, there were seas that covered the heart of continents. Long after it, there will be forests and rivers shaped by climates we cannot yet imagine. The earth does not mourn what it was. It transforms, carrying the memory of its past within the bones of its new form. Change, in this sense, is not destruction, it is continuity in disguise. The Pebas Lake may have vanished, but its spirit lives within the Amazon's rivers and soils. The mud that once settled at the bottom of its still waters became the foundation of the rainforest's fertility. The organisms that once floated near its surface evolved into the creatures that now swim through the Amazon's channels. The forest breathes through the lungs of its ancestors. Even we, the observers, are part of this story. The oxygen in our lungs, the water in our blood, the minerals in our bones, all have passed through countless transformations before reaching us. The same elements that once drifted through Pebas waters now flow through us. The same carbon once caught by ancient leaves now moves through our breath. We are made of the planet's memory, carried forward through endless change. To understand the Amazon, then, is to understand the Earth's larger rhythm. It teaches impermanence, not as loss, but as life's most fundamental truth. No forest, no river, no sea remains the same. Each is a passing stage, a temporary balance of forces that will one day give way to something else. Yet in that movement lies beauty, a kind of eternal renewal, where nothing is ever truly gone, only transformed. If one could stand in this same place millions of years from now, the view would be different. Perhaps the forest would be smaller, or wetter, or gone entirely. Perhaps another kind of ecosystem would rise here, built upon the soil and sediments that once fed the Amazon. But even then, the essence would remain. The cycle would continue. The story would still be written in water, air, and time. And so, the Amazon reminds us that change is not the enemy of life, it is the force that sustains it. Every living thing, every ripple of the river, every cloud drifting overhead is part of a much older pattern, one that began long before the first tree took root and will continue long after the last one falls. The memory of change is the memory of the course, Earth itself, patient and unending. It moves through rain and wind, through rock and soil, through every breath that life has ever taken. It whispers the same message again and again. Nothing lasts forever, and yet nothing is ever truly lost. Beneath the quiet rhythm of the forest, where roots twist through dark earth and the scent of rain lingers in the air, an older world still sleeps. It lies hidden under layers of soil and stone, sealed in time, waiting in silence. Every tree that stands today, every leaf, every vine, every living thing grows upon the remains of something that came before. Beneath the hum of insects and the rush of the modern river, there is a buried memory, the ghost of a lake that once covered it all. The ground beneath the Amazon is not simple dirt. It is a vast archive of stories, written in the language of sediment and silence. Each layer is a page, pressed down over millions of years, holding traces of an age when this forest was water. If one could peel away the soil, like lifting the pages of a book, the past would appear in color and texture. Fine clays from slow, ancient floods, sands from vanished deltas, and silts that once settled through the calm surface of the Pebas Lake. Somewhere, within those layers, the marks of long-forgotten rain are still preserved. The imprints of drops that fell 20 million years ago remain pressed into soft mud, fossilized before they could fade. They are tiny signatures of storms that swept across the inland sea, falling on waters that reflected a sky no human has ever seen. When scientists uncover these traces, they touch the skin of time itself, the moment when air met water, when clouds passed over a continent not yet as we know it. Above this buried lake, life has returned in forms the ancient world could never have imagined. The roots of towering trees now dig deep into what was once a seabed. Their fibers wind through ancient mud, through the remains of shells, pollen, and bones left behind by the creatures of Pebas. Each root pulls from that deep mineral memory, drawing nutrients that once belonged to a different ecosystem entirely. The living forest grows from the remains of the drowned one. It is strange to think that every inch of the rainforest, so full of motion and sound, rests upon what was once stillness. Where parrots now fly and rivers race, there was once a vast, unbroken expanse of calm water. The forest floor, rich and dark, was once the bottom of a lake where giant turtles and crocodiles glided through warmth and shadow. Time has folded that world away, but it is not gone. It lingers beneath, invisible yet ever present, a foundation built of memory. When scientists dig into the earth, they find pieces of that forgotten world. Fossil shells, still spiraled and smooth, lie buried beneath roots. The remains of fish, turtles, and river dolphins appear in stone layers that predate the river itself. Under the pressure of time, their bones turn to mineral, yet their forms remain, silent witnesses to an age when South America's heart was filled with water. Even the composition of the soil tells the story. The fine clays of the basin carry the chemical fingerprints of the Pebas sediments. Every drop of rain that soaks into the ground passes through those ancient layers. mingling with traces of the lake's old chemistry before seeping back into the rivers. The water of the Amazon still flows through the bones of its ancestor. The rainforest, for all its endless motion, carries the stillness of its origins. The cycles of flooding and retreat, the rhythm of seasons, the endless rise of mist, all echo the world that came before. The Pebas Lake may have vanished, but its pattern lingers in the forest's breathing, in the slow pulse of the rivers that spread across its plains. The memory of water shapes everything, from the fertility of the soil to the life that thrives within it. If one could stand at the edge of time and watch it unfold, the transformation would appear almost imperceptible. The lake would shimmer under a prehistoric sky, its surface calm, its depths alive with ancient creatures. Then, slowly, the mountains would rise, sediments would gather, the water would drain away, inch by inch, until reeds grew where waves once rippled. Centuries would pass like breaths, trees would take root, birds would arrive, and the water that once covered the land would rise again as vapor, feeding clouds that would rain upon the newborn forest, the same water, simply reborn. Today, when rain falls through the canopy, it completes a cycle that began long before the first leaf appeared here. Some of those raindrops contain molecules that once drifted in the Pebas Lake, carried through time in the endless cycle of evaporation and return. In every rainfall, the ancient and the present meet. The air carries the breath of oceans that are gone. The soil holds the imprint of lakes that no longer exist, and the forest grows upon their remains. The Amazon, in all its vastness, stands as both living wonder and silent monument, a reminder that the earth never forgets. Beneath every step we take lies a deeper layer of time, a world folded within another, each one giving birth to the next. The forest's roots sink into that continuity, into the mud of a world long drowned. The Pebas Lake may have disappeared from sight, but it remains beneath our feet, still holding the fingerprints of ancient rain, still shaping the life that flourishes above it. The rainforest breathes through that memory. It grows, it changes, it endures, a living testament to the world of water that came before. And though the lake is gone, its silence lingers, steady and eternal, beneath the endless heartbeat of the forest. The story of the Amazon is a story of time itself, slow, fluid, and ever-changing. What we see today is not a beginning nor an end, but a single moment in a much longer flow. The rainforest that stretches across South America, green and endless beneath the clouds, is not the first world to live here. It is the latest chapter in a tale written by water, carried forward drop by drop through ages of silence and motion. The land beneath those trees once held waves instead of roots. The air that now hums with insects once shimmered above a calm inland sea, and even before that, the continent itself was still forming, shifting its shape as mountains rose and rivers lost their way. The earth has written, erased, and rewritten this landscape countless times, shaping it into the world we know today. The Amazon is only its newest form, alive, breathing, and remembering. Every river that winds through the forest still carries a memory of that past. It remembers the stillness of the Pebas Lake, the rhythm of tides that reached deep into the continent, the moment when water gave way to soil and soil to trees. The rain that falls tonight is part of the same endless cycle, born from ocean vapor, shaped by mountain winds, and returned again to the heart of the basin. When it seeps into the ground, it passes through layers of time, through sediments that once rested beneath ancient waves, through minerals that once settled in silence. Each leaf, each drop, each gust of humid air holds a trace of what came before. The oxygen that fills the lungs of every creature here once drifted through different worlds, across seas, through ice, through forests long gone. The same carbon that fuels the forest's growth has been part of oceans, of rock, of other lives. The Amazon, vast as it is not separate from these earlier worlds. It is their continuation, a reminder that nothing in nature ever truly ends. It only changes its form, its rhythm, its song. If you stand beside the river and watch it move, you are seeing the past in motion. Beneath the brown, swirling water are sediments that have traveled for thousands of kilometers, carrying fragments of the Andes, of the ancient lake, of the forest itself. The water drifts eastward, toward the Atlantic, where it will merge with the sea and begin the cycle again. Each current is a line of history flowing forward, linking the mountains, the basin, and the ocean in one unbroken breath. The Amazon is not only a place of life, it is a teacher. It shows that everything beautiful on this planet was born from transformation. The stillness of the Pebas Lake became the motion of the river. The silence of buried mud became the song of insects, the calls of birds, the rustling of leaves. The forest is built upon the bones of change, and within that change lies the secret of its strength. It reminds us that nothing living is permanent. Forests grow and fade, rivers shift, climates turn. Yet in each transformation, life finds a way to continue. The Amazon story is not about loss or creation, but about balance, a rhythm between what was and what will be. And in that rhythm, there is peace. When we look at the Amazon, we are not seeing a single ecosystem frozen in time. We are seeing movement. We are watching water shape the world as it always has, quietly, patiently, without end. The same forces that once carved the Pebas Lake, that once lifted the Andes, are still at work beneath the soil, still guiding the flow of rivers and the rise of clouds. The rainforest breathes with that same ancient rhythm, its heart beating in time with the rain. The Amazon we know is not the beginning of life here. It is the latest chapter of a story still being written by water, and that story continues each moment the river flows, each time a tree reaches toward the light, each time rain falls over the forest floor. It is a story without an ending, carried forward in every drop that falls, every seed that grows, every breath that rises into the sky. Every river, every leaf, every cloud carries a memory of the world that came before. The Amazon's roots sink into the bones of an ancient lake. Its rain carries the whispers of ancient tides. Its creatures swim and fly through echoes of the past. And all of it, the water, the air, the life, continues to flow, forever connected, forever changing. If you have drifted this far with me, through time and silence and transformation, thank you for keeping curiosity alive. The world we walk upon is not just earth and stone, but memory, living memory that continues to breathe through everything around us. As this journey comes to rest, take a slow breath. Let your thoughts settle like silt in calm water. Feel the quiet hum of the planet beneath you, its pulse steady and patient, its stories unending. Until next time, sleep gently and stay endlessly curious.